thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lenny. I'm excited to be here.
I feel like this conversation was an inevitability. I feel like you're the kind of guest where it's like, we will do this someday. I'm such a fan of your stuff. I've read all the stuff you've put out there over the years. We're going to be talking about the best frameworks and mindsets that you've developed over the years that have been really helpful to you, to founders, to companies that you've worked with, to help them with growth and scale and change and all the stuff that comes with success. The way I think about this, I want to make this the greatest hits of Molly Graham.
Love it.
And so I sourced what I think are the greatest hits from a lot of colleagues that you've worked with, a lot of people you've worked with. We've chatted about the stuff that you find other people find most helpful. So we're going to be going through all that stuff. But let's help people understand why they should listen to this advice. What's kind of the backstory on these frameworks? Where did they come from? Where did you develop them? Tell us that story.
So first of all, Amivora, who you have had on your podcast, once said to me that all advice is just someone telling you what they did. And I always think about that because I really think that basically what I tell people is I've made every single mistake in the book. And then I got to the end of the book and I started inventing new mistakes. So mostly what I feel is that I like sharing my stories because I want to help people. I want to help people not make the same mistakes I did. And I also want to help people make sense of what they're experiencing. But I started in tech in 2007. I actually started at Google the week the iPhone launched. And a lot of my scaling battle scars come from a couple of experiences. They come from a year and a half at Google, which is not very long. And Google was pretty big when I was there. It was thousands of employees. But my department, which was the communications department, was 25 people when I joined. And it grew in 9 months to 125 people. And that was really my first experience with just all the sort of things that I still talk about today in terms of what it feels like to grow really, really fast. And, you know, sort of all the tools that I started developing from there. After Google, I left and followed Sheryl Sandberg and Elliot Schrage to Facebook. And I spent 5 years at Facebook. And I joined Facebook in 2008. And it's important context because it was 80 million users at the time. We were smaller than MySpace. It was, 270 million in revenue, 500 employees. It did not feel inevitable. Most people thought we were going to sell it to Microsoft. When I told people I was going there, they were like, isn't that place just like a site for college kids? And so I was there for 5 years, and it was a crazy 5 years. When I left, it was 5,500 employees, 5 billion in revenue, over 1 billion users. So, a huge amount of what I experienced, what I write about, what I talk about in Glue Club, which is the community that I run, is comes from, sort of that rapid scale at Google and Facebook. But I left Facebook in right after we went public, about 6 months after we went public. And I only like doing jobs that I'm highly unqualified for. I like being on learning curves so steep that I'm scared I'm going to fall off. And so I left, and I wanted to learn what it took to build something from nothing. And so I joined this little startup founded by Brett Taylor, a startup called Quip. I joined a couple months before we launched and ran everything that wasn't product and engineering there for him. And that was such a valuable experience to me because the experience of building something from nothing is actually quite different than the experience of, sort of like holding on for dear life while things are scaling so fast around you. And it really taught me about all the tools and skills you need to go from 0 to 1 and then from 1 to 2 and how lonely it can be to build something. We eventually sold that company to Salesforce. And then again, only take jobs I'm highly unqualified for. But the last really chaotic scaling experience I had was actually helping Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan start their philanthropy, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And I basically helped them for the first 2 years of its existence, or its sort of like first full existence. And philanthropy sounds calm. You know what I mean? We're like, oh, giving money away must be so peaceful over there. And CZI grew from, I think the week I joined, it was 30 people. And we like bought 2 companies that week. And it grew to 250 people that year. And it was like using every single tool in my toolkit that I had, taken from every other job that I'd had. So my advice and frameworks, like I said, come from having made a lot of mistakes. But I've also sort of made a personal study over the last 18 years, believe it or not, of essentially like, what does it take to thrive inside growing and changing companies, not just to hang on for dear life? What does it take to lead in the face of constant change? And really, like, the other piece that I find truly fascinating is what genuinely makes the difference between something that a business that grows but then plateaus versus these generational businesses, the ones that go on forever, sort of the difference between a Twitter or MySpace and a Facebook, billions in revenue versus hundreds of billions in revenue. So what I like to do is take my experience and use it to help other leaders. I want to give people tools that work. And I also want to be honest about how hard all of this stuff really is.
Amazing. I say this a lot on this podcast. I just love the ROI that listeners of this podcast get. You spend 20 years toiling, struggling, working so hard, learning so much, and you're just here. Here's all the answers that I've learned. And obviously not all the answers, but so many things that will help people avoid the pain and suffering that you've gone through.
That's the goal.
Also, a couple quick threads I want to follow here. One is Amivora, who you mentioned. She's now, I think, head of product at Anthropic.
Yes.
Amazing. Former podcast guest, also speaker at the Lenny and Friends Summit last 2 years ago. This other point you just made about how you've always gone to places that have been way beyond kind of your, I forget how you phrased it, but just like beyond your current capabilities almost, and like were very difficult. I just had Matt McGinnis on the podcast. He was CEO at Rippling, now CPO at Rippling, and he was just recorded an episode with him, and he had this really powerful quote that if you're ever comfortable at work and feel like, oh, I got this, you're making a huge mistake. Something's going terribly wrong. Yeah, that's not where you want to be.
Yeah, I always say I get bored really easily, which is both a strength and probably my greatest weakness. So I like being scared.
Okay, so let's actually dive into some of your greatest hits of frameworks. And the greatest of all greats, when a lot of people think Molly Graham, a lot of people think of giving away your Legos. Some people haven't heard of this. Many people have. So let's cover this. What is this advice of giving away your Legos?
So this definitely started in my experience at Google. And then Facebook was like a masterclass in giving away the Legos. But the way I like to talk about it is basically when I watch leaders and employees go through rapid scale, I like to think of like somebody putting down a giant pile of Legos in front of like a bunch of kindergartners and then just being like, build something. And that's sort of what it feels like when you start. It's like, whoa, there's so many Legos and it's so fun. There's a lot of opportunity, but it's also kind of scary and overwhelming. And you're like, there's so many Legos. What do I do? Like, isn't there an instruction manual hidden under this pile somewhere? But then you like start building and you're like, oh, okay, like, you build something and then you take it apart and then you put it back together. And then eventually you start to get momentum and you're like, okay, it's like, I'm building a house. I got this. It's a house. All right, great. And then you're like, I'm good at building houses. Like I was put on earth to build houses. And almost like assuredly inside of scaling companies, as soon as you're like, I feel good at this and I like I should do this forever, somebody's going to show up and be like, okay, it's not a house, it's a neighborhood. Like, and you need to like take this house that's kind of half built and you're going to pass it off to this other person that we just hired. And you are going to go build, dog parks and streets and other things that are entirely unhouse-like. And what happens when someone does that to you is you're like, wait a minute. First of all, I'm not done with this house, and I'm worried that this person's going to screw it up. I'm also worried that like building houses is actually the most fun thing, and that I'm going to give the Legos to that person, and they're going to have all the fun work, and I'm going to hate building dog parks, or that dog parks are irrelevant eventually, and it's going to turn out we're in the house building business. So you're just like, there's this like incredible set of emotions that come. Territorialness paired with excitement, fear paired with joy. But eventually you pass the house off and then you go work on neighborhoods and you're sort of like, okay, like dog parks, I'm good at dog parks. I got this. And then, again, you get to the like, I'm great. I was put on earth to build neighborhoods. And immediately someone shows up and says, it's not a neighborhood, it's a country or a city or a world, and it just goes on and on and on. And for me, the learning this muscle of both learning to give away what you've gotten good at and move on to the next shiny pile of Legos, and learning that the emotions associated with that are inevitable, right? Like I've been doing this for 18, 20 years. Like I still get attacked by these emotions all the time. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't give them away. and move on to the next thing. That is both the torment of scaling companies, which is that the ground is moving under your feet. And as soon as you're comfortable, someone will make sure that you are uncomfortable. But it's also the opportunity, which is that you can go from being someone that's good at building houses to someone that knows how to build entire worlds. And that is where the Legos metaphor came from.
That is such a good metaphor. And like, if you've gone through this, you so understand what this is like and what, and also just the Legos metaphor is so good for the different things you build.
Yeah, I have a very weird brain that for some odd reason just always thinks in metaphors. So it showed up when I was at Facebook in particular. I would find that like every so often I would have to have what I called a Legos talk with someone where I would just see them start to ask these questions like, why are we hiring that person? Or like, what's that team even do? And I was like, okay, we need to have the chat about the Legos. And then eventually it turned into an article and a whole thing.
The whole thing. And just to be clear, the advice is give away your Legos. This is actually the path to a successful career.
You know, I have watched a lot of people over many years struggle with feeling like they should hang on to the thing that they've been good at. And it almost always, because, essentially the nature of a scaling company is that the Lego pile is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, however fast that graph is going up and to the right. I always say that's the graph of how fast your business is growing. It's the graph of how fast your company is expanding, and it's the graph of how fast your job is getting bigger. That means that if you actually just stay and build houses, eventually you're literally buried under a pile of Legos. Do you know what I mean? You held on to something that's down here, and the opportunity is actually to stay on top of that pile and to learn to just give away your job every so often. At Facebook, I got to a place where I was literally giving away my job every 3 weeks. I was constantly rehiring myself, essentially, because you have to sort of grow as fast as your company is growing if you really want to take advantage of the opportunity that comes with companies that are growing and changing quickly.
So people are hearing this, they're like, okay, like my rational brain's like, I should give away my Legos. It'll help me. It'll be good for my career. In real life, it's very hard to actually do, to like give away this empire that you've built, this team that you've built, this project that you're like, oh, this is going to be my thing. I know you have a really fun, useful tool to help people deal with that kind of irrational part of their brain. Talk about that.
So, like I said, my brain works in weird metaphors. It's a weird brain. I was raised on the Muppets, and I like to think that this one came from, I guess, growing up watching weird animals. But basically, at some point, I realized that this emotional roller coaster that comes with scaling, with growing, with going through change, any kind of change, people feel that, was never going to go away. And that no matter how good I got, sometimes I think it gets worse the more senior you get, actually, because you sort of feel like you're supposed to know what you're doing, and then you just get attacked by this monster that's like, who even gave you this job in the first place? So basically, I externalized all these emotions that come with change into this little tiny monster. I named my monster Bob. Your monster can be named whatever you want him to be named, or her, or them. And Bob is, Bob's job, I like to think his job is basically to make me the worst version of myself. He's the one that's like, oh, that person took all the fun Legos and you should go push them over and grab them back. Bob's job is, Bob's the one that wants to send the rage emails at 9 p.m. and, burn the house down. And the thing to learn about Bob is that, like I said, Bob never goes away. Bob is someone that you have to learn to deal with. But Bob's job is to make you the worst version of yourself. So your job is to let Bob do his thing, but not act on the emotions. Like basically all these emotions are normal and they are not useful. They are not the compass that should be telling you what to do. But the other rule I have for managing Bob is, a lot of people are like, oh, you're feeling pissed off or tired or whatever, like go to bed and wake up tomorrow morning and you'll feel better. And the truth is that I want to send the rage email at 9 p.m. Like you still want to send it at 8 a.m. And a lot of these emotions just like do not go away in 24 hours. So my rule of thumb from Facebook was give it 2 weeks. And, the sort of Bob is like these waves and they just roll through. So, you made a new hire or somebody came in or you got layered or whatever, you'll have a set of reactions. And those reactions, again, they're normal, but they're not useful. They're not the ones that you should listen to. They are Bob. And typically they go away in a couple days. You get something new, some new wave. But anything that lasts longer than 2 weeks is actually something you should pay attention to. It's something that, if it's been around for 2 weeks, it's something you should go talk to someone about, whether it's a manager or a friend or a coach or someone like that. That's the real stuff. Everything else is just Bob.
Is there a rule of thumb for when you shouldn't give away your Legos? When it's like, okay, maybe you should fight back on this layering or, whatever?
No rule of thumb. In general, I would actually say embracing change is far better than fighting it. And almost invariably, you cannot see what is around the corner, but it is almost always the thing to focus on. Like, a lot of times I think inside of change, we get focused on the past. And one of the most valuable things you can do as a manager and a leader is help people focus on the future. I'm sure there are times when people have done it and regretted it, and it has led them somewhere. I think being layered, for example, is one of the hardest things for people inside these experiences where someone brings in a manager above you. And I've also seen so many stories of that ending up being a great thing for someone, even though they couldn't see it at the time. So in general, I would just say, step into the future and let the past go, and see what you're going to learn. And sometimes you'll learn that, it's time to leave, or that this isn't the right pile of Legos for you, but it'll end up taking you somewhere that's worth exploring. Holding on to things almost always leads us to the worst version of ourselves.
It's a very Buddhist way of thinking too. Just don't cling.
There you go.
Yeah. And I think another part of this metaphor, I don't know if you think of it this way, is the Legos aren't even your Legos, right? They're like the CEO's Legos, the shareholders' Legos. So you think they're your Legos, but no, you're not in charge.
Well, it is, I will say one of the hard-earned things is it can feel very emotional, and it can feel very personal. It can feel like your work, I don't know, it can feel like your life is on the line sometimes, just your work life, oh gosh, this matters so much. And one of the things that you learn as you get more senior and just have seen stuff is it's going to be okay. A friend of mine says, careers are long, and nobody tells you that, but they're long. And this moment feels so dire, and it feels so hard, and it feels scary, and it's going to be okay. So yeah, it is hard to know in the moment. And I think the story is going to be long, and this is going to be one chapter, or maybe even a part of a chapter, not a whole chapter. So embrace the length.
To build on that point, I've realized this is my fourth career doing what I do now, whatever the hell this is. I was an engineer, then I was a product, then I was a founder, then I was a product manager, and then what the hell I do now, whatever this is, that's a whole different path.
You don't have a name for it yet, Lenny?
I don't. I hate all the terms people use for this world.
Somebody called me an influencer, and I almost ripped their face off.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. The most interesting careers are winding, and they have starts and stops and failures and successes, and control. Anybody that's been through a lot of this stuff, control is usually not the name of the game. It's usually just let's see what happens. We're going to try this, and we're going to see what happens next.
This is a great segue to another framework that I've heard from folks you've worked with that have been really impactful on them. So Sarah Caldwell, who's a big deal at OpenAI, she told me that the framework that helped her most in her career is something that you call the J-curve versus stairs career growth framework. Talk about what that's about.
I actually gave a TED talk about this one a couple of years ago because I am so passionate about it. But that's you can listen to the very packaged 8-minute version of this, but I will tell you the real story because it's very relevant to a lot of folks that listen to your podcast. So I was at Facebook for 5 years. Like I said, I spent 2 years. The first 2 years I was in HR. And I was doing sort of employment branding and culture work. And I was ready to stay there. I think I had in my head, I was going to stay there till we went public. That was my plan, just because I wanted to help the company through that moment again in my head. So this guy that many people know, Chamath Palihapitiya, came to me, and Chamath ran growth and mobile at the time. And he came to me, we had lunch, and he said, in his very Chamath way, like, you're useless. What are you doing in HR? Like, this is stupid. Like, you should come work for me. And this, anybody that knows Chamath is like, yes, that is actually what he said. He manages to like insult you and compliment you in one sentence. So, so he gave me all these options on his team. And then the last one he said to me was like, I'm going to go build a mobile phone. Do you want to come do that with me? And I had like 4 simultaneous reactions. The first was like, that is incredibly stupid. Why are we doing that? And then it was like, is that actually a thing that we're doing? And then it was like, whoa, I think that sounds kind of fun. And so I left the conversation with Chamath and I went and asked my boss, Lori Goller, who's the head of people at Facebook for a very long time, like, is this actually something we're doing? And she was like, I can't believe he offered you that, whatever. And I basically just like could not get it out of my head. But it was like, didn't make any sense, that Chamath had asked me because I was in HR, like, what am I doing? I know absolutely jack shit about mobile. But I had worked on a project with him and he, I guess, thought I was smart. And I talked to like Cheryl and she was like, well, that project will be dead in 2 months, but you can do it because you'll still have a job here. A lot of my dad was like, what, don't do that, and anyway, a lot of very wise people being like, don't do that. But I kind of couldn't get it out of my head. And my friend said to me, you've proven you're really good at these sort of like company-wide project management and HR. Why don't you go show yourself how actually good you are? Like, is this transferable? So I took the job and I spent the next 6 months feeling like an absolute idiot. Like, I basically felt like a total jackass all the time. I was sitting in rooms with these like brilliant people, asking the dumbest questions of my life. And at the end of the 6 months, Chamath, I think, took a lot of pride in giving me like the lowest performance rating I've ever gotten in my life. It just felt like falling off a cliff. He, then slowly, I remember I had been doing all these trips to Taiwan because we were actually working on hardware. And I, at some point, came back from Taiwan and I like drew on a whiteboard for him the layout of a mobile phone and trying to explain to him kind of like why something he wanted to do was not possible. And I so vividly remember walking out of that meeting being like, oh, like I actually know things. And slowly, then over the following 3 years, I became an expert in mobile. And I basically, the phone itself was a giant failure, like massive, costly failure for Facebook. But it let me, it was not a failure for me. It was a huge job that taught me that I was capable of things that I never could have dreamed of if I had stayed in HR. It set me up to be capable of taking on things that I didn't know about. And so Chamath, when he pitched me on this job, actually drew me a picture on a whiteboard. He said, look, you can stay, the way a lot of people do careers is a set of stairs. You can be boring, to use Chamath, and stay on these stairs. Just walk up the stairs and you'll get promoted every 2 years and your title will change from manager to senior manager to director to senior director, whatever. And he was like, but that is boring. And he's like, the much more fun careers are like jumping off cliffs, basically, that you jump off this thing and you do fall, for a period of time. I always like to say it's about 6 to 9 months. But then this thing happens where you climb out. And, the picture he drew had this J curve sort of like basically leading you to places that are way beyond where the stairs could ever get you. And to be totally honest, that has been my experience, that taking risks, accepting the sort of like terrible fall and that experience of falling has been more than worth it. And I, part of the reason why Sarah mentions it is that I do give this sort of talk to people that are inside of really fast growing companies because it's such an important place to let go of Legos and jump off cliffs because there's so much opportunity. And it is a place where if you prove to people that you're actually good, if they believe that you are the kind of person that they can use to do lots of things, you can get these opportunities that you are just so deeply unqualified for, but they can take you to places that you could never have imagined. You can come out of those companies with skills that no one would ever have reasonably hired you to do. But I ended my time at Facebook in product and, did business development and hardware and a whole bunch of stuff along the way. And again, nobody would have hired me to do that at the beginning, but it's just because I kept saying yes to things.
Molly, I got tingles listening to this story. Wow.
Does it sound familiar, Lenny?
It does. I want to ask is, jumping off a cliff, sometimes you fall and you fall and you keep falling. Are there any kind of traits of like, okay, this is one that might be a J curve and worth the risk of falling, and this is when you should probably just let's not do this?
Yeah. So, I just think there are different kinds of fear. And, we talk a lot about this in Glue Club because one of the things, there is like a financial fear, right? Like leaving a job and taking a job that has financial risk associated with it, or leaving a job and taking time off, which is something I spend a lot of time talking to people about. You got to do the math, and sometimes there is a type of fear that is telling you like, this is not the right time, or I don't want to be financially anxious for months and months and months. I use finances because it's the most concrete example of like a type of fear that you should actually listen to. And sometimes you can do the math. And, I always counsel people through that. I'm like, what is the number that you need to hit so that you're not constantly terrified financially? And that number is, wildly different for people based on their background and their life. Can you do that? Can you consult? Can you whatever in order to take this leap? But a lot of times fear is just you saying, I'm scared I can't do this. I'm scared I'm not capable of it. I'm scared that I'm scared I'll fail. And that's the kind of fear that I think of as like a flashing green light. Because I'm like that, and it sounds like Matt McGinnis said this too, where it's like, that's the kind of fear that's saying, why don't you go prove to yourself that you are actually capable of this? Or if you fail, like you'll have learned something too. You know what I mean? You'll have learned, like, I took this job in product at Facebook, as my last chapter there. And let me tell you things that people should never fucking hire me to do. It's like, I am not a good product manager, but I would never, I've got a great product mindset. I can sit, in a bunch of chairs and hang with the product folks, but like, I'm not the person that cares about the button. Do you know what I mean? And I would never have learned that. I wouldn't have known kind of who I was if I hadn't taken that risk and, failed or at least learned that it's not something I wanted to do again. So there's many different lessons that come from facing down those fears and jumping off the cliff, but mostly what it is knowing yourself better and knowing where you go next from there.
That is such helpful advice. I also love how you frame this of prove it to yourself that you can do this. It's not, I'm going to show them that I can do this, because the way you describe this, usually it's an opportunity given to you. Hey, can you do this thing? We want you to lead this new thing. And the fear is like, I don't think I can do that. And what you're saying here is prove it to yourself that you can, or I guess it's also, okay, maybe I can't, and then I'll learn that, and then I'll know more about myself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the greatest gifts in a career is knowing yourself, and that's a lifelong journey because who you are and what you want changes. But that knowledge and that gift, like nothing accelerates your self-knowledge faster than trying to do something that you don't know how to do and that you're scared of.
There's this, probably the quote I use most on this podcast comes up again in my mind as you talk about this line that the cave you fear contains the treasure you seek.
Hell yes. Exactly. Well said.
There it is.
I haven't heard that one from you, so clearly I need to listen.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad I don't overuse it. It just feels like it comes up again and again.
Yeah.
And I think your point about the runway and the finances is such an important one, because that's a very real practical question. One thing I did when I took time off, I took a year off after I left my job. What helped me was I just created a runway goal for myself. I'm just like, okay, here's what it's going to cost me for 6 months or a year to live without any income. Am I comfortable just burning through these tens of thousands of dollars to explore and see something new emerge? And so that you just have to feel good. Okay, yes, I'm going to burn all that money.
That's exactly the exercise. You're saying runway, I say burn rate. So like we both were raised inside of companies, inside of tech, but I think it is do the math, right? What can you afford? And it's both what can you afford and still feel safe? Because sometimes, I mean, again, I think that is different for everyone, but it is such an important set of math to do because a lot of times that number is smaller than you think it is, like than your brain makes it out to be if you have this sort of like existential financial anxiety versus like, I always say like specific financial anxiety is much more useful than existential financial anxiety. And some friends are leaving jobs and I'll be like, hey, your number is $5K or $10K a month. You have to believe that you can get a consulting gig that will pay you that. Do you believe that? And it's like either yes or no. And then, okay, either we're doing it or we're not. you know?
The other part of this J curve that I think is really important to touch on is this idea of for the first 6 or 9 months, you're going to be at the bottom of the J curve, like falling, still falling.
Yeah.
And some projects don't last that long. And then you're like, okay, total failure. I never emerged from this fall. So is there any advice there of just like, how do you create that enough space to give you a chance to start to unfall?
I mean, the most valuable thing that happens as you fall is learning. And even on the other side of failure, you've learned a shit ton. Like I always say, like the most important thing to do in the falling phase and the risk-taking land is to learn to embrace being a professional idiot, you know, basically being the one that shows up at the meeting and is like, what are we talking about? Like, what does that word mean? Because for a bunch of reasons. Number one, you can learn so much. And again, even in the face of failure, no one can take away your learning. Do you know what I mean? But the other thing is that like, it turns out that a lot of the questions in the world that you're sitting in the meeting and you're like, this is a dumb question. Like everyone's going to think I'm an idiot, but then you get brave and you ask it and it turns out it wasn't a dumb question. Do you know what I mean? Like, turns out that everyone had that question in their mind, but no one was brave enough to ask it. So from a skills perspective, again, regardless of outcome, being the person that sort of takes their learning in their own hands, learning no matter what, and learning to sort of like ask those dumb questions, it's a superpower. I always say that like actually my superpower is being a professional moron because I'm the one that shows up in a room and is like, do we have goals? Like what are we doing? Why are we talking about this? Why are we having this meeting? And most of the time it's actually what I was hired to do, which is bring clarity.
It's so funny. I just recorded a podcast episode with a PM named Zevi who joined Wix, and he had this thought. He's like a very young PM just getting started. And he's like, okay, I need to be a 10x PM because that's what they expect of me. That's what everyone that is really good. That's how I think of a 10x PM. And then he went into his first meeting and he just failed. And he just felt so bad. He's like, I guess I'm not that 10x PM. They're all going to see that. They think I'm terrible. And then he did another presentation a little bit later and people were so impressed with how he learned and evolved and improved. And he realized that he needs to be not a 10x PM, but a 10x learner. And that's what people actually expect from someone, especially a junior person.
Yeah. Well, and I was having a conversation last night with a friend of mine who has a senior in high school. And I was like, what is the plan? Like, what are we telling this senior in high school, like to think about relative to their career, given everything that's going on with AI? And we talked about it a bunch, but what we both circled back to was this idea of soft skills, and that actually like the only thing you can really anchor on right now is that, you know, teaching kids grit, teaching them hard work, teaching them learning, right? Like learning how to learn, loving learning, being able to follow in a world that's changing this fast. And I say this inside of companies too, right? I always say like what you know today is way less valuable than what you can learn by tomorrow. If you're inside of a company where the growth curve is like this, what you know today is like irrelevant. Somebody once told me I'm sure this is faster now, but they rewrote the entire code base of Google every 8 years, which means that like if you're not learning, if you're not evolving, then you become irrelevant and extinct. It's actually the whole sort of like underlying point of the Legos stuff is that like evolution is the way you stay on top. And I think that's more true today than it's ever been.
And luckily AI is really good at helping us learn.
Totally.
So that's good. Thank you, AI. And this actually comes up a bunch in the podcast. I ask a lot of AI forward people what they're teaching their kids, and curiosity is one of the main things people talk a lot about, just to like help them develop curiosity about the world. And yeah. Okay. I feel like I could be talking about this specific topic for a whole podcast episode, but I want to move on to a couple other frameworks that you've developed. One is something called a waterline model. And another former colleague of yours said this is the most impactful thing that they've learned from you on their career. So talk about the waterline model.
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, the waterline model is not mine. It's from some business book somewhere, but I actually learned it. So my first job out of college was leading wilderness trips. I led 75-day wilderness trips in Patagonia and Alaska for a school called NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School. And NOLS basically teaches essentially leadership and communication skills to students. I was mostly leading like college age kids through wilderness expeditions. So by having to lead a group of your peers that you don't know. Anyway, the waterline model is something that we taught on Knowles, and it's a really, really helpful model for understanding how to diagnose when something is not working on a team. And so I teach it inside of Glue Club, and I'll just quickly explain it. So basically, the way to think about the waterline model is that a team is a boat, and it's a boat on an ocean trying to get somewhere. Getting somewhere is goals, right? What are we trying to build or ship or do? And essentially, that is going to be harder or easier based on whatever the shape of the ocean is, right? If it's really choppy, it's harder. If it's smooth and calm, it's going to be easy to get to your goals. So the waterline basically asks the question, like, what is going on under the water? What is going on that's making it harder or easier to get to your goals? And there's essentially 4 things underneath the water, and they are in a descending order. So the surface level is what's called structural things. And basically, structural things are like goal setting, vision, roles, expectations, like kind of the structures you put in place to make a team and a company and a business make sense, that touch every single member of the team. Right below that is something called dynamics, which is essentially like how the team works together. It's culture, it's decision making, it's how we resolve conflict, all the sort of like interwoven pieces of how teams work together. And then below that is interpersonal. So basically relationships between 2 people and all the things that come with us being humans. And then the bottom is intrapersonal, meaning within one person, challenges and issues there. And the interesting thing about this model is that most people, when something's going wrong on a team, a lot of times we always go to the bottom. We go to the people. We're like, the people aren't getting along. That person's having a rough moment. We go to the humans. But the rule with the waterline model, which is very memorable, is you snorkel before you scuba. So 80% of problems on teams actually happen because of structural issues or dynamics issues. So when there are problems on your team, where you start is at the top. You start structural issues. And one of my biggest things that I say all the time, over and over again inside of Glue Club, is your only goal as a manager, if you do nothing else, is clear roles and clear expectations. That's it. Because honestly, like, I've taken over a lot of teams in my life, and almost always I show up and it turns out that no one knows what their job is and no one knows what success looks like. And if you can make those 2 things clear, which again is at the snorkel level, it will fix, a huge percentage of other issues on a team. But the main thing is like where you start, and just always sort of starting at that structural level or the dynamics level, and not sort of immediately going to the people and all that. Because yes, people cause all sorts of problems, but a lot of times the problems are happening because they're existing inside of a structure that's confusing.
Another very vivid metaphor, and just I love how it builds on it with this snorkeling. Okay, so just to be super clear about this, the takeaway here is you have a problem with your team, with the company. Many people think they jump to like the people are the problem. They're not good enough. They're not working hard enough. Really, what you're saying is most often the issue is not the person, it's the situation, whether it's the structure of how they're set up to work or the dynamics amongst the people. And specifically what you're saying is like the role maybe isn't clear, or what success means and for that role is not clear.
Every company I've worked with or advised, like, I often start with like, what are the goals? And usually what you get back is not clear. And that in and of itself is a structural issue, right? How can someone show up and decide what they're going to do with their day all day if the goals aren't clear, if they don't actually know what the priorities are? And then it goes to like, okay, role, right? Like, do I know what my job is? Do I know what number was hired to own and drive? And then like, do I know what success looks like? How does my role tie to that overall goal that the company has? Just literally right there. You got like probably 80% of problems inside of companies, because this is the hard work of company building. Like, it's the stuff that's not intuitive. How do you organize a group of people to know which direction to row, and that equation, again, I would say 80% of problems that I see, performance issues, like I always start with, does this person actually know what you expect of them? If not, go back to step 1. Do you know what I mean? Clarify expectations. So the waterline model is just helpful for reminding us, like, start at the top.
So what would you do there? Say you're a manager, you're having an issue with a team member. Would you go and ask, hey, let's just make sure we're aligned on goals and roles? Is that how you approach it, or is there a different approach?
So a lot of times what I do is two-sided, right? So it's like, hey, tell me, here's what I'm seeing. And tell me what's going on for you. Like, do you know XYZ? Do you know tell me what, when I take over a team, when I'm doing my sort of like listening tour, part of what I'm asking is, what do you think your job is? What number were you hired to drive? Because what you'll find is often like their picture is different than your picture. You think you've been clear. They somehow got, you described an elephant and they spat out a tiger. That coming back to like, okay, no, we're building an elephant. You're in charge of the trunk. Will, in some percentage of cases actually make a huge difference to the person's work and time and performance. And, in plenty of cases it doesn't, but that's always where I would start, because it so often is just like a more fundamental problem that then would lead you to look at other things across the team. But yeah, that's, I would say, two-way dialogue, but re-clarifying roles and expectations, re-describing the elephant over and over and over again is one of the hardest parts about being a leader, because you feel like a broken record, right? You feel like an idiot. You're like, I've said this 45 times. Turns out no one heard you the first 43, and you have to re-describe it in order for people to hear you and to re-understand their sort of role and what they're doing.
I love how you reframed the way I approached it by starting with, here's what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? What do you think your role is? The very like nonviolent communication oriented, which is a clear pattern on this podcast, just the power of that specific framework.
Yeah, totally. Well, like I said, work is about humans, and it's the art of sort of like organizing humans to get something done and build something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And that is an art of sort of the humanness in all of us. How do we get people to hear us? How do we get people aligned?
Work for a lifetime.
Totally.
This episode is brought to you by GoFundMe Giving Funds, the zero-fee donor-advised fund. Did you make a New Year's resolution to give more? I want to tell you about a new product that GoFundMe has launched called Giving Funds, which is a smarter and easier way to give. GoFundMe Giving Funds is a DAF, or donor-advised fund, from the world's #1 giving platform, trusted by over 200 million people. It's basically your own mini foundation, without the lawyers or admin costs. You contribute money or stock, get the tax deduction right away, and then decide later where you want to donate. There are zero admin or asset fees, and while the money sits there, you can invest and grow it tax-free so that you can give more later. GoFundMe is a fintech unicorn working for good. Make a better world in 2026 and start your giving fund today at gofundme.com/Lenny. They'll even cover your DAF pay fees if you transfer your existing DAF over. That's gofundme.com/Lenny to start your giving fund.
Okay, so let me actually follow this thread of the importance of goals and just being clear around this stuff. You have these 6 rules for creating clear goals and alignment on teams. Talk about these 6 rules.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there should be less than 6, but it's where we're at. I would say at a high level, 2 things before I get to the 6. One is that I definitely have a bone to pick with OKRs. I feel like it's obviously been a really helpful framework for Google and others. And a lot of times when I show up inside a company or I'm talking to a leader and I'm like, what are your goals? What I get back is this like spreadsheet that has like 100 lines and feels like it's written in Greek. And like, when I look at it, I'm like, this doesn't create clarity for anyone. And it brings me back to sort of like, what is the point of goals? Why do we have them? And at the end of the day, goals are a communication tool. That's what they are. They are a communication tool designed to create clarity, to help people know, I'm going to show up at my desk. What should I work on? What's the most important thing? And your 100-line spreadsheet doesn't help anybody. And the second thing I would just say is like, you really have to ask the question, what is right for me at this company and this stage? What is right for a seed stage company is not what is right for, a company that's got an established business and a clear go-to-market machine. So, when I'm building in seed stage, I'm setting goals every 2 months in a very iterative way. When I have an established business, I can actually set annual goals, but annual goals for early stage companies is just like a waste of time. So anyway, a lot of my goal setting stuff actually comes from Facebook, which I think was very, very good at this. So the first rule is that no company needs more than 3 company goals. And the point of company goals is to help people know what the most important things are to success. So Facebook basically had 3 goals for the entire time I was there. It was 5 years. And we did, 6-month goal setting. I think we did annual goal setting that ended up getting reset every 6 months, but whatever. So the 3 goals were this. There was growth, which was measured as monthly active users. That was the externally reported number eventually, MAUs. The second goal was engagement, meaning how often do people come back and use the site? And the third was revenue. And we literally had 3 goals for the 5 years that I was there. If you can govern that business with 3 goals, you can govern literally any business with 3 goals. So no company needs more than 3 goals. The second thing is that one goal needs to win in a fight. So if I'm sitting down and asking, how do I prioritize my time on a given day? I need to know what is the most important thing. At Facebook, we had growth, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can add monthly active users to a social media site, including you can go buy a whole bunch of bots in Indonesia, and that would add to your MAU number, but it would not add to your engagement number. And it was very clear for the entire time that I was there that engagement was the most important thing. Acquiring users that were going to use the site all the time, that's what drives revenue. It's also what drove, sort of the heart of that site. So if you had to prioritize something, you prioritized engagement. That goal won in the fight. The third I'll say is, I call it the explain it to me like I'm 5 goal, but like an intern that started on Monday should be able to look at your goals and understand them. And if they can't, then you are failing because they are not a communication tool that's effective. You have to be able to understand the goals. You have to explain the acronyms. You have to have numbers that make sense to average people. Otherwise, again, it fails as a communication tool. The fourth one is actually, I stole a phrase from Claire Hughes Johnson, who you've had on your podcast, but wrote a book called Scaling People. And in it, she says this sentence that I love, which is strategy should hurt. And my role used to be like set non-goals, basically make it as clear what you're not going to do as what you are going to do. But strategy should hurt is a much better way to explain it to people, which is if you're not making trade-offs that are painful, you are not actually helping people prioritize their time. Because the nature of work is that people will show up every day and do something. And either you are very clear with them about what the priorities are, or they're going to prioritize for you because they're going to choose what they work on every day. And we see this so much with founders where they can't cut things off the list. They just have to have the 10 goals. And I'm like, cool, 6 of these goals are not going to get done. So either you pick which 4 it is, or other people are going to pick for you. So strategy should hurt. If your goal setting process is not painful, then you're not prioritizing heavily enough. Okay, ready? We're on number 5. This is more of an organizational point, but it's really important for the waterline model too, which is that one goal has one owner. You have a number, that number has a name next to it. If you cannot do that work, you haven't done the most important work to actually make sure that these goals get accomplished. And it's organizational work, and it's very painful because, sometimes it feels like, oh, this person could own it or this. Maybe they'll just own it together. 2 people owning a goal is no one owning a goal. One person owns the goal. Who is it? It's not you as the CEO. It's someone that works for you. So one goal, one owner. And then the last, which is the hardest, is that goals by themselves are not enough. I've spent a lot of time with founders that are like, I did it. I set the goals. Why not working? I don't understand. And I'm like, what did you do after you set the goals? And they're like, I don't know. I set the goals. Goals, James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, has this really lovely sentence, which is winners and losers have the same goal. Goals by themselves are not enough. You have to have a process by which you follow up on the goals and you hold people accountable to the goals and you learn from the goals, because so much of goal setting, particularly, if you're earlier in building your company, is about learning from trying to do something. You set a goal. Can we do it? How hard is it to move this number? That is the learn. You might be wrong all the time, but you're learning what it takes to move the number. So setting the goal by itself, not enough. You have to build a process and a system to actually learn from the goal.
Wow. This list there's so much power in this list. It's
too long.
No, I don't think it is, because each of these has so much depth and power to them that saves you so much headache and just wasted time and resources. Just like the idea of one owner, one goal, something I've personally discovered to have such power because, and correct me if I'm missing something here, but just if you feel like someone else may be doing the thing or feels like it's not just fully your responsibility, there's so much less energy and just like mental, I don't know, you just don't care as much about hitting that goal. If it's you, if it's like, Lenny, this goal is your goal, and if you hit it, you've done it. If you don't, you've done a bad job. Like that, so motivating. If it's like me and Molly, okay, well, we'll figure it out.
It creates a flood of clarity that seeps down from the person too. And to go back to the waterline model, I would say so often you'll actually find companies that have set goals, but no one owns the goals. Everyone owns the goals. Multiple people own the goal. And it's like that, you didn't actually get all the way to the answer, And I will say that the ownership thing is hard. Like it can feel painful, but it's really important. There's only one owner. And that means that that person, come hell or high water, owns that number.
Yeah. The way I described it at Airbnb was just like someone's ass has to be on the line for this. And that just works. That's such a powerful lever to drive things, to have one person responsible. The other is just this idea of strategy hurting. I love that. I love that phrase. I forgot Claire had that. So true.
So good.
Because the whole idea is you need to not do things. You need to decide what you're not, like the whole strategy is a big part of it is what we're not doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not making painful choices, then you're not actually doing it.
And this idea of 3 goals. So is that just like, so do you go into a company and just like go through a checklist essentially of here's the 6 things I look at to tell me where there's opportunity to improve?
When I work with founders and I see their goals, what I do, I use it as a way to get to know the business. And I'm just going to be like, literally, like, what is this? Like, what are you trying to explain? And I can usually, through, asking a lot of really dumb questions, which, like I said, one of my superpowers, get them to explain to me, the one sentence and the one number that they're actually trying to get across. But it takes work. And that's part of, it's almost like easier to write the 100-line spreadsheet than it is to say, wait, what are the 3 drivers of this business? Genuinely, like, what are they? And how do they relate to each other? And there can be things underneath them, but there's 3 at the top that matter. So yeah, I'm not like a scientific person about it, but a lot of it is just by asking people to explain their businesses to me, you can basically find the drivers.
And the story about Facebook having these same 3 goals for 5 years, considering their success, you may think they're not as complicated as your business, but I am confident they are just as, if not more complicated. Their marketplace, social network, their ad business, there's a lot going on. And if they can work with 3 goals, you can do that too. Yeah. And to your point, it needs if it's not hurting, then you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Exactly.
I love how this is very much what I wanted this chat to be. It feels like every little segment is like its own, could be its own podcast where we could talk about this for hours. So I'm really excited how this is going. Kind of moving on to another topic. You have not necessarily rules, but rules of thumb that you find really helpful for people to have in their head as they're dealing with change and scale and growth and all that kind of stuff. So let's just walk through that.
Yeah. So for leaders that are leading through change and growth, like the list is probably long, but I always say to people, don't come to me for like management 101. I'm not the person to ask on like how to run the most effective one-on-one with your people. What I think is not talked about enough is what it takes to manage and lead through change. And that is a very particular set of feelings. And the first thing, I learned when someone makes you a manager or when you take a job as a leader inside a company, you really do feel like, oh, like who gave me this job, and you sort of feel like you're supposed to know the answer to things. Like people come to you and ask questions and you're like, I'm supposed to know, right? I'm a leader. I am supposed to have answers. And I think particularly inside of rapid change and scale and growth, it's really important to understand that your job as a manager and a leader is not to have all the answers. It is not to have all the answers. It is to get good at finding them. It is to get good at bringing people together to find the answers. And that is hard because it requires saying, I don't know, let's go figure it out a whole bunch. And it's scary as a leader to say, I don't know, because you think, oh gosh, people are going to see through me. But, again, the more you travel in life, the more you realize that the most experienced leaders are the ones that say, I don't know, all the time.
I think this is a good reminder of this Bob the Monster concept, because hearing this, okay, I don't need to have all the answers as a leader. In real life, being in a meeting, people are like, hey, Molly, what do you think of this? Like, you're like, oh shit, I should have a good answer. And so I think that's a good reminder of this idea of this Bob the Monster is going to tell you, oh, you don't know anything. You're not ready for this. You suck at this. You're going to fail. Everyone
They're regretting hiring you.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's going to see through you. Imposter. Yeah.
So just remembering there's going to be this part of your head, and that's okay. It's there, but it doesn't mean it's true.
And these things are muscles, like dealing with Bob is a muscle, right? Learning to like not react to all those things that attack you. But also learning like, oh, in this moment when someone asks me a question and I'm like, oh, actually, I should be like, I don't actually know. Let's go. Who should we ask? Like, how can we learn this? How can we explore this together? What do you think? Like, those are all actually very powerful questions, and they're terrifying, to particularly earlier in your career as a leader and a manager.
Awesome. So the lesson there is no one expects you to have all the answers as a leader.
No. And it's particularly in this world, right? The one that's changing as fast as it is. Like, nobody knows, nobody knows what the answers are in a lot of cases. The war will be won by the people that are good at exploring and figuring it out.
I love that phrase.
So the second one is, and everyone that has learned this has learned it the hard way, do not promise things that you can't control, right? It's so tempting, like particularly when you're hiring people, to be like, oh yeah, like your onboarding will be smooth and calm and everything's clear. And like, we've figured it out. Let us tell you our vision and how obvious and clear and smart and blah, blah. And then they show up and it's like, oh shit. You know what I mean? Like there's no manual. No one knows what they're doing. It's all ambiguity and chaos, right? It's so easy when someone says, I want to know that I'm going to be your CMO forever, to be like, sure, you can be my CMO. You don't know that. Do you know what I mean? So being really careful with promises of things that are out of your control, like stability or titles or never hiring over someone, is like a flashing red light, because there is literally no faster way to demoralize high performers than going back on a promise, right? Everyone that has been through it knows that feeling of like, they told me this when I joined, and then they don't do it, and you're like, well, fuck this place, So no faster way to demoralize people or to hire the wrong people than promising things that are actually out of your control. Being honest and upfront about who you are as a company, about what you're able to promise, like all of that is actually, it's very hard work, but it's so important because so much is out of your control. And you need to hire people that are cool with that.
Love that. I learned this the hard way once. I had one of my early projects. We were late, and the head of product was just so pissed. He's like, because I've been telling the CEO it's going to be on time, because you've been telling me it's going to be on time, and then it wasn't. And why didn't you tell me that? And I was just like, okay, it'll never happen again. And he's like, don't tell me that, because that's not true. You can't guarantee that. And so that taught me that lesson of just like, yeah, you're right. Like, you want to say that, like, it feels so good. Okay, this will never happen again, but you can't. And they know you can't promise things like that.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm going to quote Claire Hughes Johnson again, but she has this really fun phrase that she said in a talk at Glue Club that I've now latched onto and stolen from her, which is, she was like, promises like that are like letter bombs that you mail yourself that are going to explode in your face in like a year. And I was like, that is the perfect metaphor. It's because it's like short-term pain, right? Like, you want to make this person feel good right now, so you like promise them something, but in 1 year, you're going to make them feel terrible. So don't do it.
Great advice. All right, keep going.
Yeah. So again, could probably go on the like topic of what it takes to manage and lead forever inside this stuff, but I'll give you two more that I yell about a lot in Glue Club. The first is that we spend huge amounts of time talking about hiring. Like, how do you get good at hiring? Like, what's the right interview? How do I find the right people? Firing people is as important as hiring people. Getting good at identifying when someone does not belong or someone is not going to work out is actually a skill. And being good at it as a company and as a leader is as important as identifying the right talent. Because eventually, if you're not good at firing people, what you have is essentially barnacles on a ship. I'm really going for it with the ship metaphor. Anyway, but like, it's drag. People that are sitting around not sort of pushing the team forward. So it's painful and it's horrible because it is humans, right? But when someone doesn't fit, no one is right all the time when it comes to hiring. I actually say most people are wrong half the time. Like the best people in the world at hiring will tell you they have about a 50% average in terms of being right. That means half the hires don't work out. That means half the time you're going to need to fire the person. So it's such an important skill to get good at, particularly when you're going through a lot of change. And the last one is humans are messy and it's very emotional. And when you're a leader, particularly if you have any kind of Enneagram 2, or just if you like to make people happy and you want to be liked, it can be so hard to lead teams because you get tangled in the people, right? Firing people is a painful experience. Reorganizing things, layering people, all these things are emotionally painful for the people and they're emotionally painful for you as manager. But my mantra that almost always leads in the best direction is serve the business, not the people. Meaning everyone is better off if this company is wildly successful. Everyone looks smart and, makes lots of money or whatever if this company grows and does what we all dream it can. So at the end of the day, the best decisions, the ones that are always going to be right, are the ones that are like, how do we do the right thing for this business? And it also helps in political situations, right? Like someone's acting weird or their Bob is raging all over the company. Like technically, everyone has the same goal. The goal is to build the biggest business possible. That's the answer. The answer is always like, what's the right thing for the business? And the people stuff can fall away when you actually focus on like, what's the right thing for the business?
A really useful tool to do that I learned from my manager is to think about when you're trying to decide like whether to fire someone or change a project, even though it's going to upset someone, is to say, okay, if there were no emotions involved, if this person had no negative reaction to this, what would I do?
Totally.
And then that's the thing you should do. And then you just do it. And then the question is, how do I communicate this to them where they're least, their pain is lowest, essentially.
In the kindest way possible.
In the kindest way possible. And because to your point, if you optimize for the other thing, if making people feel good, like everything just falls apart. Like everything, they're going to suffer even more down the road.
Absolutely. Direct is kind. And it feels kind or really honestly easy to avoid these things or to work around them or to not. But at the end of the day, it's basically just a drag, right? The Barnacle saying, like it drags on your company, on your time, on your energy, et cetera.
Yeah. But again, very hard to do in real life, to do the thing that's hard and makes, cause someone to be sad and upset and frustrated and maybe leave.
It is so hard. And all these things are muscles, you get better at, they don't become easy. It's not like anybody's like, oh, it's so, like I enjoy firing people. No, but you recognize it faster and you are like, oh, like I need to go do this, and that is actually, it's a practice and something that you need to practice to sort of become the kind of leader that leads these like long enduring companies.
Yeah. And this tool of asking, what would I do if there were no emotions involved and this person wouldn't be upset? It helps you like realize, okay, I see this actually doesn't make sense to just do it the easy way right now because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it strips away the emotions.
Mm-hmm. Something else I wanted to make sure we spend a little time on is you have another tidbit along these lines, which is around putting most of your energy into high performers versus spending all your time with people that need help. Talk about that.
As a leader, as a manager, like you're running these teams and someone's struggling. And it's very easy to get dragged into that and to sort of end up spending a huge amount of energy on it. But high performers are actually the future of your company. And if you think about it, and if you've spent time on it, those are the folks where if you invest your time and energy in them, you're going to get the sort of like 10x return that people talk about all the time in Silicon Valley. But what I've witnessed is that most people have like a high performer and they just like leave them alone. They're like, that person's doing well, so I'm just gonna let them do their thing. And what I do when I have a high performer, that's like my favorite thing in the world, is invest time and energy in them and basically build a whole system of working with them that is designed to kind of draw out potential. And I would say there's two things here. One is it's really important to realize that like our tendency is to actually spend time on low performers, and it is not a good use of your time. See the point about firing people. But the other thing is that actively investing in and developing high performers is something that's important to get good at as a leader, because that is how you kind of create these little rocket ships that end up, you'll manage someone who's just like a project manager and all of a sudden they're running a whole function inside the company eventually, but it's because you took time and energy to invest in them. And my basic way of doing that, not to like, I could spend a long time on this, but I would just say is I run experiments. I basically develop a theory about someone. I think this person is capable of this kind of thing. And then piece by piece, it doesn't have to be like a whole job or whole project. It can just be like, an incremental experiment. I'm going to see if they can do this without, with less guidance or support from me. I'm going to give them a bigger project. I'm going to give them something with more visibility. I'm going to manage them less, oversee them less, whatever. All of those are experiments to basically test your theory and deepen your theory in terms of like this person's potential and their ability to help the company. And you're basically, for me, what I'm doing is kind of deeply getting to know that person and then trying to pair them with company needs. What do we need? Where do we kind of like, this person's great at zebra farming. Where do we need zebra farming? So like, how do I get them working on bigger and bigger and more critical things? And to be honest, this is what people have done for me. Like, at Facebook in particular, I benefited from people being like, ooh, like, come help me with this thing. They saw potential in me and they asked me to help with something. And it unlocked a huge amount for me. And so it is such a powerful tool for getting more out of people that might be a little bit stuck if you leave them in this box. But if you start to expand the box, you can really unlock people.
Okay, so speaking of high performers, you've worked with many very high-performing founders, CEOs. You worked really closely with Zuck, with Sheryl Sandberg, with Larry and Sergey at Google, with Brett Taylor, who I just like you try to read his resume. It's like it takes like 3 lines of things he's done over the course of his career. And so I just want to spend a little time on what are some things you've learned, like maybe a few things you've learned from them, that group, that you find yourself sharing with other people most?
That list is very long, but I'll give you a couple. The first one that I think is kind of counterintuitive is, so I said I worked at Facebook. I worked on culture, which is one of those words that doesn't really mean anything. So I define it as sort of like the way we do things around here. And I thought my job was to like shape the culture. I thought it was to like push the culture. And the most humbling lesson I learned is 80% of the culture of a company is literally defined by the personality of the founder. Like Facebook is Mark. Google is Larry and Sergey. Like Google, when I was there, felt like a university. It's where ideas are more important in a lot of ways than what's shipped. And it's like, there's at campus and they basically wanted people to live there when I was there. It was designed to basically be a 2 PhD students' paradise. Facebook felt like a 19-year-old hacker's dorm room when I was there, like that. And it was, shipping above all and all else. And that it seeped with Mark's DNA. And, I spent ages trying to create various changes inside the company or trying to kind of push a point. And Mark would say like literally one thing in an all hands. And it was like somebody threw a boulder into the pond. So our job as operators or as leaders around founders is to help articulate the culture that they're creating and to help, extend it. My version of founder mode, which I know you've spent some time on this podcast, is your job is to build a company that would make a decision the way the founder would when they're not in the room, right? That is the work of building a company around a founder, but your job is not to shape culture. That is mostly defined by the literal personality, strengths, and weaknesses of the person at the top. And that's been true of Mark, and it's been true of Brett. Everywhere I go, that's who it is. You don't need a consulting firm to tell you. Just go do a personality diagnosis on your founder. And the weaknesses thing is real. Like I've seen and watched friends like try to ship a set of values at a company and it just doesn't match who the founder is. You say, move fast and break things or whatever your version of that is, and your founder loves ambiguity and is perfectly happy with not making decisions, all that leads to is cultural dissonance. It leads to people being like, wait, what? I thought we said, we care about moving fast and making aggressive decisions. And it turns out, so being really careful about what you say, because what people actually feel when it comes to culture is what you do, and how you act every day. That is, you can never write anything down and you will still have a culture. It will be created through the actions and the decisions that you make and that your founder makes. So that would be a huge one.
Let me spend a little more time on this because this is so good. So all this advice on culture, and it feels so true based on everything I've seen. So tip one there is just you can't really change the culture. Maybe there's like a little bit on the edges you can adjust. It will come down and trickle down from the founder, CEO probably mostly, but just the founders in general.
And founder CEO is probably the single biggest.
CEO.
Co-founders, it depends a lot on the company.
Awesome.
I think Stripe, is probably very much like Patrick and John, but it's not every co-founder that has that level of power and influence.
Awesome. And then the way you describe culture, I think it's the way Seth Godin talks about it too, who's also been on the podcast. How cool is that? He said culture is, and what you said, culture is the way we do things around here.
Yeah.
That's what culture is just like, that's how people describe your culture, is the way we do things around here.
Yeah. I ran culture, whatever the hell that means, at Facebook for a hot second. I literally haven't done a values exercise since. And it sounds crazy, right? Because in theory, I know how to do this stuff. I don't really know how to do this stuff. But for me, the point is process and systems and how do we make decisions? That's where culture actually lives. It is what you do. It's how you hire. It's how you fire. It's who you don't hire. It's all of those decisions. That is culture. So whenever I'm working with a company or building a company, that's what I'm focused on, not on what's the shiny word that we're putting on the wall. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the way you're describing is, it's, as you said, it's what you do. It's not what you say.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Keep going.
Okay. I'll give you two more that are helpful. This one is Mark Zuckerberg classic, but he has this very strong feeling that people don't escalate enough. And he was very adamant about it at Facebook. And he brought it to CZI too, where he was like, escalation is a tool. And he's like, people get stuck. They get stuck with two people with equal power trying to solve a problem. You can spend so much time bashing heads, going back and forth. And actually what you just need to do is go up, right? You need to go. The problem is that we think of escalation as I'm A and B and I are disagreeing. And so I'm going to go up to C and tell on B, right? I'm going to go tattle to the teacher. That is not what escalation is. What escalation is we disagree. Neither one of us has enough power to make this decision. Let's go to someone who does. My boss, my boss's boss, wherever it is. As soon as you are stuck, escalate. Go together. Go make your case to whoever it is. Go together up. That is unlocking, right? It's saving you a whole bunch of time. And it's something that I've found as I've worked with companies and leaders in Glue Club. It's not a muscle that's very comfortable for people, but it's so smart. And, Mark has a lot of these, but that one I really took away because, again, I think so many people think of escalation as bad, like a failure. I failed, so I had to escalate. No, it's a tool. It's what management is for. They're there to unblock you. Let them unblock you. Stop arguing over something you can't decide.
And they'll be so happy knowing you did not waste a week debating this and then just arguing and just looking at data. It's okay, I can just tell you exactly what we should do. Let's just go do that.
Exactly. You lack context or you lack power. And then the last one actually is from Sheryl Sandberg, who I learned an enormous amount from. Huge. It was going to business school without going to business school, working with her. But I say it a lot right now, so I'm going to say it on your podcast, so maybe some people will hear me. Growing more than 100% every year is a bad idea. 100%, the happiest growth rate is 50%. 100% is manageable. Anything more than doubling, and you are signing yourself up for a world of pain. And I have seen this over and over and over again. I had to scream way louder about it 5 years ago than I do now, because we've been through collectively a lot of pain and a lot of layoffs. And, obviously the combination of 2021 and then AI has led us to sort of talk about unit economics and scaling with tools, not people. But I still see companies, and I'm still talking to founders that are yeah, we're going to we're 50 people and we're going to be 150 people next year. And I'm like, could you possibly do that with 100 people? But here's what basically happens if you grow it more than 100%, which is you're growing too fast to dedupe all the issues. So like somebody posts this role, it actually turns out that role is also being hired for on this other team. So you're hiring two people who more or less have the same job description and are assigned to the same number or the same problem, but nobody talked to each other. And those two people both show up and they're like, I am doing this. And the person's like, wait, I thought I was doing that. Anyway, so then you've got all this and think about all the time and all the energy and all the money that goes into deduping that. If you slow down, if you hire for quality and for real need versus sort of the panic hiring, whatever your sales model spits out or whatever, you'll actually find leverage. You find, oh, I didn't need that person, or I didn't need this whole team, or I didn't need this whole function, or I can wait for that. So slow down. And again, these are all just guidelines in terms of like the 50% is happy and 100% is manageable. But like having seen enough of this, I can tell you like these are good rules and you should pay attention to them. And sometimes you're like, I have to double or I have to more than double or I have to triple or whatever. I'm like, okay, just ask a whole lot of questions as you open roles. Ask a whole lot of questions as you hire, because you will find duplication. You will find chaos coming in the front door. More people does not actually make you faster. Do you know what I mean? We think it does. It does not. It makes it harder. It makes it harder to get work done. It makes it slower. So you should be scared of adding people, not like, oh, this is the answer to all my problems.
Amazing. And just to be clear, you're talking about the growth of the company. So doubling in a year, bad idea. It's possible, but you're saying it's going to be very hard and painful and probably a really bad idea.
Yeah, more than doubling headcount growth. Great point.
Yeah.
Yes,
Awesome.
Exactly.
It's
Please feel free to do whatever you want with your business.
Just advice. This is top of mind because I just had the interview with Matt McGinnis, but so much of what he talked about is this resonates with what you're talking about. He talked a lot about under-resourcing your team.
Totally.
Leads to much better outcomes because people don't work on the low priority stuff. They focus on only high priority stuff.
Yeah.
And the other is this idea of escalating. He talked a lot about that. Just like escalation is good. Tell me when there's something I can help with, please. I'm here waiting constantly
there you go.
to help.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Amazing. So maybe for a final question, one of your former colleagues, Eric Antonow, who's just like this epic dude that few people know about, that I've chatted with over the last few months because he knows so many people that come on this podcast. He's a former Facebook person now at OpenAI. I asked him what I should ask you about, and he told me something really insightful about you. He said that you had this really massive growth spurt at Facebook, which you shared and talked about. And then after you're leaving, you had this like huge ambition to become COO, become this huge big deal boss person, just like take over the world. And then he noticed your ambitions significantly pivot to kind of working on community building and helping people with their careers. And you turned down really big C-level role opportunities. And the way he described it is you were a dog that once thought you were a cat. And the other metaphor he uses is you change from AC current to DC current, which I don't know exactly what that means, but so does this resonate? And if so, just what happened there?
Eric is actually better at metaphors than I am, and I regularly rip his metaphors. But yes, Eric Antonow, the least well-known but most brilliant person in my life. Yeah. So I gave a talk at a company recently, and somebody asked the question, what's something you've changed your mind about? And I was like, woof. But I actually talked about this because, my brain is like developing this model that is not done yet, but it's basically this idea that like everybody has sort of a proving phase to their career where you're like proving to yourself and probably to your parents and some other people, that you're like good at stuff. You're like, I'm going to prove, and it's an important phase because you need to learn, all the stuff we talked about. You need to learn what you're good at. You need to learn that you are good at things and that people should hire you for things. And what are those things? But part of that phase is also kind of like doing what you think matters, like what you think you should do, family programming or career books tell you this is what you should do, titles and all that stuff. And then I think everybody has a moment. And I think this moment varies wildly in terms of when it hits people, where you hit some sort of wall or I don't know what it is, speed bump, something. And the world forces you to say, okay, I've proven myself and I'm good at this thing. What do I want to do with it? You know? And for me, like I spent, 10 or 15 years proving to myself and to others that I was really good at this thing, basically working with brilliant founders to help bring their vision to life. That's what you should hire me to do, right? That's what I was known for. And it turned out that that wasn't what I loved doing anymore. And it was really, really hard to walk away from because there was a lot of shoulds. It was like, you should take this job with this fancy title. People are going to think you're so cool. And, you get to I call it a LinkedIn crush, where you're like really excited to post the job on LinkedIn, but you're deeply unexcited about doing the job. So you have all these LinkedIn crushes and you're like, and I sort of vividly remember this one job that I turned down where I had to go for many walks. And what I was repeating over and over again to myself was, what does this get you that you don't already have? What does this get you that you don't already have? And I think for me, it was this realization that these things that fed me early in my career just didn't feed me anymore, that I didn't get joy and excitement out of doing these jobs anymore. And I wasn't scared. So it led me to actually on a very long, windy journey, a founder journey, even though I have trouble with that title, just like the influencer title, to figure out what I wanted to build. And, what I would have told you I wanted to build 3 years ago is actually not what I'm doing today. But through a lot of really fun experiments and a journey that never ends, what I've discovered is that what I love doing is building safe spaces for leaders to learn and grow, but also to find sanity and connection in a world that's kind of insane, whether it's, working in a startup or some other kind of insanity. But that feeds me, and that there's nothing I love more than that. And I could not have told you that 3 years ago. But it was, to Eric's point, it really took a lot of work to switch currents or switch myself from a dog to a cat or whatever his metaphor is. And I think it's, it's the work of, it's ongoing work. But it's that thing of like, what do I want versus what do I think people expect of me?
There's so much depth there. This could be another entire podcast conversation talking through this journey. But I'm going to close with a note from your partner, Sarah. She told me that she has this sticker on her notebook with 3 pieces of advice that you gave her when she started at OpenAI. Get to know your customer. They have the answer. Be patient because everything is going to change. And just keep trying. So just as a final question, is there anything along those lines that you think might be helpful for people to hear? Or is there anything else you want to share or leave listeners with?
Part of what I think is so important to realize inside of scaling and changing companies and, the world is like, some things will always be true. And part of what I was saying to Sarah in the get to know the customer, they have the answer, is like, whatever bullshit is going on around you and whatever walls and ceiling are being rearranged, this week, the customer is never going to change. That's a thing that will never change. And I think finding those immovable objects, those compasses in the face of a storm, which being inside of a scaling company and a startup feels like a tornado, and I think OpenAI is extra special on that front. You have to find these guiding lights that get you through that storm. And I think it's sort of the same thing as serve the business, not the people. What are the things that will always be true? We are here to do this. We are here to do, we are here to serve the customer. And then the other piece of the sort of the 3 things that she wrote down is I think that we as humans, we seek stability, our brains would like things to stop changing. We would like things to stay the same. And that is just not a reality inside of companies that are growing and changing as fast as OpenAI or, a lot of the companies today that are being built. So actually you need to start to expect instability. You need to start to just assume things are going to change. Assume you're going to have a new boss in 6 months, right? I talk about this a lot when I talk to folks at OpenAI. Like, you need to stop expecting that anything's going to be the same in 6 months or a year. Like, you will have a different job. You will have a different boss. How do you prepare for that? Do you know what I mean? How do you almost see the instability as stability? Because it's the only thing that is definitely going to be true. And part of that is to just keep going. You know what I mean? To just find these lights and these compasses or whatever metaphor sticks with you and focus on those. Because whatever is happening around you, like, you just got to keep moving forward and keep learning as much as you can, because that's the real opportunity. Like, whatever happens to the company, however successful it is, like, all that you take away from it, I always say all that you take away from it is people that like working with you and want to work with you again, and what you learned. That's it. You might hopefully take a bunch of money, but you might not. So, like, people and what you learned. That's it. Focus on that.
It's all about the friends you made along the way.
Yeah,
that old line is true. Oh, man. Molly, I feel like we've gone for so long, and we've just scratched the surface. I'd love to have you back to go deeper on a lot of this stuff. I'm going to skip the lightning round because we've gone long, and I want to keep people from having to listen to more. So I'm just going to end with what should people know about what you're working on? Where can people go find you online? And how can listeners be useful to you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Substack. I have a Substack called Lessons that I'm slowly trying to turn into a community where we can talk about things, the real stuff. And you can find me at Glue Club, which, if you're a leader inside of one of these crazy companies that's changing all the time, we can be a great home for you.
What's the URL there, just for folks to check it out?
It's glueclub.com.
Glue, Glue.
GLUE.
CLUB.com. Great.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of people, what people can do to be useful to me, I love helping leaders with problems. Like, I really get a lot of energy out of unsticking people and helping people feel supported and seen and helping them grow. I do that through Glue Club. So if you're a leader that feels like you want some sanity and some support in the face of whatever tornado you're in, that's a great place to come. But the same is true of Substack. So if Glue Club isn't for you, like, come on over to Substack. I've opened up a bunch of channels to just, like, talk about stuff, listen to people's problems, answer questions, because I love helping people. And I think it's a complicated moment right now to be a leader and to figure out which way is up. So come on over.
Amazing. Molly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lenny. This was really fun.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.
Our whole team is only like 15 engineers. We use a ton of Devin when we're building Devin. Most folks on the team are definitely working with up to 5 Devins at once. And so Devin merges like several hundred pull requests into production in the Devin code bases every month.
What percentage of your PRs are Devin versus humans right now?
It's in the neighborhood of a quarter or so.
Where do you think this will be at the end of the year?
Honestly, we expect it to be a decent bit more than half.
You guys are so ahead of how companies work with AI engineers.
AI is going to be the biggest technology shift of our lives. So most of the big tech revolutions that we've had over the last 50 years, like personal computer and the internet and the mobile phone, they all had this big hardware component that was a big part of the distribution. Folks who were building for those industries kind of saw their market grow and grow and grow, basically steadily year over year, as the number of people with mobile phones increased, right? As the number of people connected to the internet increased. One of the things which is already, I'd say, different in AI is just how explosive the technology can be. There's no weight on hardware distribution. It means that the space is just growing so exponentially.
How is the act of being an engineer and building changing?
I think there's going to be way more programmers and way more engineers a few years from now. Pretty quickly, the form factor of what it means to be a programmer obviously is going to change. But at the end of the day, of course, the discipline is all about just being able to tell your computer what to do. And so in that lens, I really think that programming is only going to become more and more important as AI gets more powerful.
Today, my guest is Scott Wu. Scott is the co-founder and CEO of Cognition, which makes a product called Devin, the world's first autonomous AI software engineer. Unlike other AI tools that I've highlighted on this podcast, Devin is designed to act like an actual remote engineer that you chat with like you would with any other human engineer through Slack
or through its dedicated website. When Devin launched about a year ago, it was very much a junior engineer. Over the past year, they've made a lot of progress, and Devin is now being used by tons of companies in production. We chat about how their engineering team of 15 uses Devins to build Devin, including how every engineer uses about 5 Devins each to help them code and move faster, how a quarter of their pull requests today are committed by Devins, and that they expect this to be over 50% by the end of the year. We also talk about how Scott imagines software engineering is going to look in the future and how the role of an engineer changes from a coder to an architect. We also get into the 8 pivots that they went through before landing on this path, why Scott believes AI tools like this will lead to more engineer hiring versus less, also where the name Devin comes from, and so much more. This episode is going to blow your mind. I highly recommend you listen to it if you're at all interested about where engineering, product building, and AI is going. A huge thank you to Claire Vo for suggesting a bunch of great questions for this conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. Also, if you become an annual subscriber of my newsletter, you get a year free of Linear, Superhuman, Notion, Perplexity, and Granola. Check it out at lennysnewsletter.com and click bundle. With that, I bring you Scott Wu. This episode is brought to you by Interpret. Interpret unifies all your customer interactions, from Gong calls to Zendesk tickets to Twitter threads to App Store reviews, and makes it available for analysis. It's trusted by leading product orgs like Canva, Notion, Loom, Linear, Monday.com, and Strava to bring the voice of the customer into the product development process, helping you build best-in-class products faster. What makes Interpret special is its ability to build and update customer-specific AI models that provide the most granular and accurate insights into your business, connect customer insights to revenue and operational data in your CRM or data warehouse to map the business impact of each customer need and prioritize confidently, and empower your entire team to easily take action on use cases like win-loss analysis, critical bug detection, and identifying drivers of churn with Interpret's AI assistant Wisdom. Looking to automate your feedback loops and prioritize your roadmap with confidence like Notion, Canva, and Linear, visit entrepret.com/Lenny to connect with the team and to get 2 free months when you sign up for an annual plan. This is a limited time offer. That's interpret.com/Lenny. Many of you are building AI products, which is why I'm very excited to chat with Brandon Fu, founder and CEO of Paragon. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Lenny. Thanks for having me.
So integrations have become a big deal for AI products. Why is that?
Integrations are mission critical for AI for 2 reasons. First, AI products need context from their customers' business data, such as Google Drive files, Slack messages, or CRM records. Second, for AI products to automate work on behalf of users, AI agents need to be able to take action across these different third-party tools.
So where does Paragon fit into all this?
Well, these integrations are a pain to build, and that's why Paragon provides an embedded platform that enables engineers to ship these product integrations in just days instead of months, across every use case, from RAG data ingestion to agentic actions.
And I know from firsthand experience that maintenance is even harder than just building it for the first time.
Exactly. We believe product teams should focus engineering efforts on competitive advantages, not integrations. That's why companies like U.com, AI21, and hundreds of others use Paragon to accelerate their integration strategy.
If you want to avoid wasting months of engineering on integrations that your customers need, check out Paragon at useparagon.com/Lenny. Scott, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be on.
I'm really excited to have you here because you are building and you've been building something that is very different from what a lot of other AI companies have been doing for a long time, although they are starting to converge to where you guys are now. We're going to talk about that. And it's also just such a unique point in the history of AI and just the journey of AI. And so it's really cool to be chatting right now. And I feel like we're going to chat again in a few years and be like, wow, we were so right about so much and so wrong about so much.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to have you here. Let's start with talking about Devin, giving people an understanding of just what the heck Devin is. This is the main product that you guys build. What is the simplest way to understand what is Devin?
Absolutely. And so Devin is a fully autonomous software engineer that is going to work on tasks end to end. And so there are a lot of great tools for all parts of the stack of the AI code workflow. What Devin does is it is a full asynchronous workflow. And so you can tag Devin on an issue in Slack. You know, you're talking about an issue and you tag Devin. You can tag Devin in Linear. You can have Devin, and Devin will make pull requests in your GitHub. And so it's very much built to work with engineering teams as your junior engineer.
Amazing. Okay. So I remember when you guys launched this, there was like this big pitch of this is your new AI engineer. And it was really good at a lot of stuff. It wasn't great at other things. It's been a year now about since you guys launched. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the best way to think about like the level of seniority that engineer had back in the day when you guys launched, and then the level of seniority of engineer today, if that's, I don't know, measure of how to think about Devin?
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about, by the way, because a year ago when we did the initial launch, I mean, people didn't really believe that an agent was possible, right? And it was a very different time. It's like start of 2024. Things with model capabilities were definitely quite a bit earlier on. Reasoning, especially, was quite a bit earlier on. And yeah, I mean, in the time since then, it's obviously developed a lot. I think in terms of practical skills, there's some comparisons we make. Sometimes we kind of say, well, when we got started, it was kind of like a high school CS student, and then as time went on, it became more of like a college intern, and now it's like a junior engineer. But I would say though that those are more like rough guidelines, because I really like the phrase jagged intelligence, for example, because there are certain things that it is much better at than a human. There are certain things that it's much worse at than a human. And I think over the last year, we've learned a lot, especially about not just coding agents, but agents in general, just like really building out like how all of us should be working and interacting with agents as part of our flow. And so a lot of the things that we built, I mean, it's, there was no Slack, there was no GitHub integration, there was no linear, there was no interactive planning phase working back and forth. There was no way to touch up Devin's code. And so a lot of the features that we built on the product side since then have really been about basically, figuring out how to make working with Devin and handing off tasks to Devin as smooth of an experience as possible.
That's so interesting. So a lot of the work has gone not into how do we just make Devin the best possible engineer, but it's how to work with this new type of entity that we haven't ever worked with.
I think it's a 50-50 of both. I think the capabilities obviously, have improved a ton, and we've seen these get better and get measurably better. But I think the other side of it is everything to do with, really the product interface and the tools and so on. And I think, I think today folks generally know how to use chatbots and to work with chatbots, right? And that's an interface that people are familiar with. And obviously with agents, it's still like a real curve, I think, to learn how to use them and how to get the most out of them. And so it's really exciting to see a lot of others starting to build and do a lot more in the agent space as well. But I think this is the kind of thing that we're all really figuring out together as a space.
What can you share about just the scale of Devin at this point, whatever you're comfortable sharing? And then just where do you think the level of Devin's coding abilities will be in a year?
So we work with companies of all stages and sizes. On the smallest end, it goes to, startups of just one or two people who are using Devin to build out a lot of their kind of like an initial prototype or initial product, all the way up to, big public companies, Fortune 100 companies or public banks or things like that who are using Devin like across their engineering teams. In general, it's, we've seen a huge range of the use cases there. And obviously the kinds of engineering work that you're doing at a 1 or 2 person startup is very different from the kind of work that you're doing at a public bank. But throughout, it's all been basically, being that junior buddy of yours that makes you go faster and really multiplies you, I would say. I think there's it can multiply you as an engineer, obviously, by just like letting you work with your own team of Devins instead of having to be kind of like fully synchronous on a single task. And then it's also kind of like multiplying your team and multiplying your team's knowledge base, because Devin really accumulates a lot of the knowledge from working with every member of your team and is able to bring that into each new session.
Awesome. We're going to show people how it actually works later in the podcast. We're going to do a few live demos. But let's actually go to the beginning of the journey. What's just the origin story of Devin? How did this all begin?
The founding team, I mean, most of us have known each other for years and years and years, actually. And for almost everyone, this is our first time working together, but we've known each other a long time. And we all actually had our own kind of journeys in AI for the last decade or so. And so for myself, I ran a company called before this called Lunch Club, which was an AI for a professional networking product. And I ran that for about 5 years. And, one of my co-founders, Steven, was one of the first engineers at a company called Scale AI, which has obviously grown a lot and done very well. My other co-founder, Walden, was an early engineer at a company called Cursor, which has also obviously grown a lot and done really well. And our whole team was kind of like that. Many of us knew each other from competitive programming and math competitions, but we had stayed very closely in touch, in the decades since then. And we've all had our own journeys. And so, we had one person who was running teams at Neuro. We had one person who was at Waymo, someone who had their own YC tools startup for machine learning. And we were really excited to build something together. And this was around like late 2023, so about a year and a half ago at this point. And yeah, when we got started, I mean, I think there were a couple of things that we felt really strongly about. And one was that reinforcement learning was really working and was going to be the next big paradigm shift in capabilities. Back then it was, the initial ChatGPT launch in 2022, and those models were, to first order, were, what we would call imitation learning in AI, right? Which is basically, you have the model read all the text that you can find on the internet and then train it to talk like somebody on the internet would talk, right? And there are kind of obviously a lot more details on top of that, but that's kind of the first order pass of what was really done. And it was amazing, right? I mean, it passed the Turing test. It was able to respond and to have encyclopedic knowledge about a lot of things. And I think this new paradigm, which we've gotten into over this last year or year and a half, is really high compute RL, which is a very different paradigm, right? Which is basically the ability to go and do work on task and put something together and then be evaluated on whether that was correct or incorrect, and use that knowledge to decide what to do and to learn from that, right? And so, we felt very strongly that was going to happen. I think for us is code was the natural thing to work on for a couple reasons. One, because, we're all programmer nerds ourselves. And so teaching AI to code is about as cool as it gets for us. But also because, code has this whole automated feedback loop, right? Where you can run the code. And that is the kind of automated feedback that really feeds into the RL, which makes these models so great at coding. And then the other thing that we felt very strongly about was that the product experience was going to shift from, what I'll call like text completion to agents, basically, right? And to first order, I would kind of say, there have been a lot of great experiences in text completion. It's been used for marketing, it's been used for customer support, it's been used for education, and in code, obviously, as well as the GitHub Copilot was kind of really the dominant product of that initial wave, right? But I think the big shift that we really felt we would see is moving from kind of this text to text model to an actual autonomous system that can make decisions, that can interact with the real world, that can take in feedback, that can iterate and take multiple steps to solve problems. And now we call that agents, but that was what we were really excited about at the time. So it was always coding, it was always agents, and in some ways that kind of feels like it should have been been clear from the start. But even with that, I feel like we've pivoted like 8 times or something within coding agents, over the last year and a half. So
I just noticed recently all the top AI companies, sort of, not all, but many of them, the product that is winning is different, has a different name from the company, which is not typical. Cursor is AnySphere, Bolt is StackBlitz, you guys are Cognition Labs, like V0 is Vercel. And it just tells me like these all emerged later in the company's journey and they tried a bunch of stuff and like, oh wow, this thing worked. And it's so interesting that it's so common amongst these top AI
and there's
companies.
even, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic, and Claude, and Google. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I agree. So when we got started, it wasn't even really a company. I mean, it's more like a project or a hackathon almost. We got a bunch of we booked an Airbnb basically for a couple of weeks. This was around Thanksgiving time, and just got a bunch of people together who were just excited to hack on some projects and build something cool. And it's funny, actually, the first thing that we were building for actually was more like solving like these more like contest programming problems and using like an agentic loop to really do better on that. And so obviously, if you run your code on the test cases, you can evaluate, there's a lot of agentic work that you can do there to try and do better. And that we spent some time on that initially. And then, we've kind of gone from, the story of the whole company for us in some sense has been going from hacker house to hacker house, And so after that, we had another hacker house, and that's where kind of some of the initial ideas for Devin came and really building like a software engineering agent and not just like a coding agent and having it interact with a lot of these tools. But even then there were so many iterations, and, even like the idea of talking to Devin, for example, was like, it was something that we had to come up with, right? Initially, it was just like you hand off a task, and then it works, and then it shows you like this whole finished code, right? And now obviously it's like you can jump in at any time, you can give feedback on the plan, you guys can scope out the task together, when you're working with Devin. And a lot of these things we had to develop, obviously. And certainly we've learned a lot about the use cases, the form factor. We've made a lot of big improvements and step function improvements on the capabilities and Devin's ability to use tools and debug and make decisions. And so it's been a fun journey. I mean, I think like, I would say that the grounding question for us really, which is one that we think about all the time, is really just like what is the future of software engineering, and how should we be working with AI to write code? Because I think at the end of the day, of course, that's that's what underlies all of the product decisions that we make. So
I like that you're asking the juicy question I wanted to get to. Before I ask it, it's just for the history books. When did you guys start kind of hacking around, and when did Devin launch? How long was that period?
Yeah, so we started in November of 2023, which was it was just like hackathon mode. We officially made it into a company around the start of 2024. And then our initial launch was in March. And so it was like nonstop. I mean, it's been nonstop for the entire last, 17 months, but it's getting to the launch, and then obviously working with enterprises and developing the product a lot more, building it and getting it to work for a lot of practical use cases. And then making it fully available self-serve in December of last year. And now we've rolled out 2.0, obviously just a few weeks ago. And so it's been a very busy time for us.
Understatement of the century. Let me ask this question because you touched on it a bit. This whole idea of Devin as a person and this idea of creating a personality for Devin. It's unlike any other, I believe, AI app. No one else has like a name and you don't think of it as a person. What made you guys decide to go that approach, and just how do you design it to work well that way?
I would say it's a decision we're pretty proud of, I would say. I mean, I think there's a lot of different product experiences out there. And I think the thing that really makes Devin unique in what it does is that you can really hand off. And more what we've seen, honestly, is that I think a lot of kind of explaining the Devin experience to folks is really just explaining it as, this is your junior buddy, and that goes for a lot of the parts of the flow, where in the onboarding, for example, initially I would say like we've definitely had a lot of users come in and just kind of see the blank screen and not really know, or they'd ask, hey, like I'm going to do this whole big re-architecture of the whole code base. And basically, what we've learned over time is to basically get folks to think more like, whoa, let's work on getting the repository set up first. Like, let's make sure we hand Devin a couple one-pointer tasks so it can get familiar with the code base. Let's get it the thing. If Devin needs to be able to test the code or run the linter or CI or things like that, obviously we want to make sure Devin's got its own virtual machine set up to be able to do that. And similarly, like I think the usage pattern, I think often it wasn't clear. And obviously you can sit and just kind of watch Devin do it action by action and work that way. But we found that the best workflow really as a team building a lot of stuff was to work with multiple Devins and to run them asynchronously and to kick them off and to only jump in basically as you needed to provide feedback or steer the plan or anything like that. And so in many ways, I think Devin as a name really is our attempt to kind of capture the soul of that as a product, where it really is, treating it like a bit more of an autonomous entity that you can hand off tasks, that you can work with, that you should be teaching and learning with over time.
I want to come back to an area you started us down and then I took us away from, which is impact on software engineering and then how software engineering is going to change. So there's kind of two parts to this. Just like when people are using Devin today, say in this year, how is the act of being an engineer and building changing for those companies? What does that look like?
By the way, we're all software engineers ourselves. It's like I'm a programmer by training and still a programmer at heart, certainly. And I think the way that we've always thought about it is there's layers of abstraction and there's tools. And one way I would say it at a high level is kind of, I think of AI in general as, computers are obviously getting more and more intelligent and are able to do more and more. And, it's possible there may come a day where computers truly do everything that we do and humans are not responsible for any of it. I don't expect that to come particularly soon. But I guess what I would say is, until that point, for as long as we're still part of the equation, one of the most important things to do, obviously, is, for us as humans is to instruct our computers on what we want and what we want to build and what we want to do, right? And software engineering is, we think of it today, obviously, as Python and C++ and JavaScript and all these things. But at the end of the day, of course, the discipline is all about just being able to tell your computer what to do. And so in that lens, I really think that programming is, if anything, is only going to become more and more important as AI gets more powerful. And I think the thing that's really really exciting for us is like really like seeing that kind of iterative transformation. And so you asked what things look like today, and I would say, it really is like having like a junior buddy or really a team of junior buddies that you can work with, right? And so every engineer on our team, we use a ton of Devin when we're building Devin, and so Devin merges like several hundred pull requests into production in the Devin code bases every month. Which is, our whole team is only like 15 engineers. And so it's a pretty sizable fraction of all the code that we write. And the way that we use it is basically, yeah, everyone's got their whole team of devons. If you're going to be like looking through various issues, if you're going through feature requests, if you're going through bugs, if you're going through new paradigms that you want to build, then it is naturally the case that there's a lot of handoff points where you just say, hey, at Devon, here's what's going on. Can you please take a pass at this, right? And sometimes Devon will be able to do the task 100% autonomously and just makes the PR, and then you merge the PR, and that's great. Sometimes you want to be able to jump in for the 10 or 20% that really needs your help. Maybe there's a few details with how exactly you want to scope it, or how you're architecting this feature, or maybe you want to go and test the front end at the end yourself to make sure it looks exactly the way that you want, and give your 1 or 2 lines of feedback after that, right? But a lot of it is really, is kind of like, learning to work with Devon to be able to just do more in parallel and build more.
What percentage of your PRs are Devon versus humans right now?
Yeah, I'd have to look, but it's in the neighborhood of a quarter or so of all of our requests. Yeah.
And then what was it like 6 months ago?
Oh, it's grown a ton. We've seen it grow exponentially internally ourselves as well. And so it's kind of an interesting one where, again, it's always both the capabilities and the product interface. And so, I think the intelligence has increased a lot. But the other thing, of course, is that, we've spent a lot of time in figuring out how to build and to really kind of build for an interface where you can get Devon's value on tasks where Devon is able to do the 80 or 90%. And so Devon is obviously not perfect, and it'll make mistakes and so on. And a lot of the question is basically, how do you scope out your initial task with Devon and then just kind of set Devon off and have it go and do the things that you want to do? How do you come in at the end and review and give feedback? How do you make sure Devon learns over time? How are you able to kind of just check in as needed and course correct if you want to?
Okay, so today about a quarter of your PRs are Devons. Where do you think this will be at the end of the year? What would you guess?
I think by the end of this year, we expect it to be more than half. And as time goes on, one of the things that we've seen is just you're able to do more and more and more work asynchronously, right? And you're able to hand off more and more. I think the soul of programming, the soul of software engineering has really been about through all the areas. Not just now, but even when it was assembly, right? And even when it was Pascal, and even when it was punch cards or whatever. I think the soul of it has really been basically just about defining the problem that you're facing and really thinking through exactly what is the solution that you want to build. Thinking through the architecture, thinking through the details, and really kind of mapping out in your mind exactly what you want to build, basically, and what you want to have your computer do. And I think that's what makes software engineering really great. And I think that's like the funnest part of software engineering. I think at the same time, that's probably, in the neighborhood of 10% of the average software engineer's time, right? Because 90% of the time is, you've got this Kubernetes error that you've got to debug, and you have to see what went wrong, and the system crashed, or you left some port open and this is messing up, or there's a bug report that you have to take care of, or you've got to migrate your code, or you've got to upgrade to a new version, or things like that. A lot more kind of like implementation. And one of the ways that we've kind of thought about Devon and building Devon is really allowing engineers to go from bricklayer to architect, so to speak. And a lot of it is just like getting to the point where you can do the high level directing and you can basically specify things exactly how you want. I think it is very much about still having the human in control and having the human able to do the full specification, but just multiplying the magnitude of what you can do and what you can build, in 1 day or 1 hour or however long.
So in the future, say someone is trying to get into software engineering, thinking about becoming an engineer. First of all, do you think people should, classic question everyone's getting these days, should you still learn to code? So that's I'd love your perspective there. And then 2, for people that are engineers today, what skills do you think will be more and more important and then less important in this discussion of moving from bricklayer to architect?
Yeah, for sure. I love this question. And first of all, the question of, whether you should still learn to code, my answer would be absolutely yes. I think to a large extent, computer science, when you take computer science classes and when you learn these fundamentals, sure, you're learning a little bit about, how a particular language's syntax works or something like that. But honestly, most of what you're learning really is about the ability to logically break down problems, for number one. And 2, I would say, is just, the model of a computer and a lot of these decisions and a lot of the abstractions that we've built over time, right? Like, what is a database and how should you think about a database? What is a garbage collection system and how do those work? And all of these different pieces. And the reason I think that's important is because it's the same with a lot of these other, arguably we've already gone through these phases in programming. And I think this next one is going to be, somewhat faster and somewhat bigger, but in many ways a similar flavor, which is, when you work with Python today, obviously a lot of things are already abstracted away from you. And in some sense, someone from 50 years ago might already call Python, you just get to explain in English what you want, and now the computer does it for you, right? And that's great. And I think it's really powerful. It's opened it up. I mean, we have far more programmers, obviously, than we ever have before because of that. But I would say, certainly, as you're building your skills as an engineer, it really helps a lot to understand the abstractions and to be able to peel the layers beneath, right? And so, folks will use assembly, for example, if they're really performance optimizing a piece of code. But also, it's in order to build good systems and to understand these things, you certainly want to understand these abstractions of, how does networking work? What is TCP/IP like exactly? Or what happens with this Python code when it gets interpreted, or all of these details? And I think similarly, I think we will get to a state where, with no experience at all, you're going to be able to build some pretty cool stuff and to do some pretty amazing work just by explaining what it is that you want. But I think that, for quite some time, you'll really want to be able to think precisely about the details, to peel back the abstractions, to be very, very, very precise about what it is that you want to build and how.
And then for skills that you think are more and more valuable for engineers, like where should engineers today be leaning more and more into, and versus forget this, I don't need to think about this anymore?
For sure. And I think architect, I mean, it's, we already have a term for architect in engineering, and I think it is directionally the right term. And I think a lot of it is really, it's I think one thing to kind of just do a routine implementation and write boilerplate code and things like that. And I would say that, in many ways, AI coding has already made us much faster at that, right? But I think a lot of the core questions of understanding very complex systems and working in the context of the whole company and thinking about, the product that you're building or the work that you're doing, and understanding, okay, what are the problems that we want to solve? How do we want to solve those problems? What is exactly the solution that we want to build? What are all of these key decisions and trade-offs that we're going to be making? Basically, I think folks who are able to do that really, really well are just going to be able to leverage themselves more and more. And so if anything, I think there's going to be way more programmers and way more engineers, a few years from now than there are today. And I think pretty quickly the form factor of what it means to be a programmer obviously is going to change, and in some sense it already has. But I think there's just going to be so much more for us to build. I think one of the great things, folks talk about Jevons paradox all the time. I mean, software is truly the kind of the shining example of Jevons paradox, where we have always managed as a society to find more and more things that we want to build software for and build more code for, and I really think there's a lot more out there to do.
For people that don't know Jevons paradox, can you briefly explain it?
Absolutely, yeah. So Jevons paradox just says that as the price of something goes down, it can still be the case that the total spend on it actually goes up. And so, you can think about this with money, you can think about this with time or resources, but the direct version here is, I think, as it becomes easier and easier to program, and as programming becomes more and more effective, I think we're going to have a lot more programmers. I think in a kind of zero-sum view, you might say, well, we're going to be 10 times faster at software engineering, and so it means that we're going to need 10 times fewer software engineers, right? But I think in practice, what really is going to happen is actually we're going to build even more than 10 times as much code. And because, all of the work that we do is so capped, obviously, on our ability to actually build and execute and iterate, we're going to have so many great ideas out there. We're going to have so many great products out there. People are going to build a lot more personalized experiences, for example, and there's going to be a lot to do.
Going back to the way you guys use Devons, so you said that every engineer has kind of this fleet of Devons. How many Devons per engineer do you find most people are working with these days at your company?
Yeah, so it's very asynchronous, and so obviously you can kick them up and you start them up and shut them down basically as you see fit. But most folks on the team are definitely are often working with up to 5 Devons at once, I would say. And it's a nice flow where you think through, all right, what are the 5 things that we want to get done today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have Devon 1 do number 1. You have Devon 2 do number 2. Devon 3. And the thing about it is, a lot of it is and for what it's worth, I think it's taken us some time to really kind of like to adjust to it and get to the point where it's really intuitive for us. But I think it's definitely a different experience where you're handing off most things asynchronously, and the goal for each of your tasks is to be there for the parts that really need your expertise, where either you really, really need to define exactly what it is that you're solving for and what you're building, or maybe some of the more complex parts where you want to steer Devin towards, particularly what kinds of changes you want to make. I want the class to be set up this way, and I want, we should go and change all the downstream references to this as well, or whatever. But basically having Devin do the bulk of the work asynchronously with you.
And then how many engineers do you guys have roughly?
Yeah, so our engineering team today is about 15 people.
15, 1-5.
1-5, yeah.
Holy moly. Okay. And then each one has 5-ish devins.
Yeah.
So there's 5 times the number of devins as engineers. What I love about this is just like a glimpse into where the future is going. You guys are so ahead of how companies work with AI engineers. And so seeing how you operate is going to be essentially how most companies will end up operating.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we've already seen this shift, I would say, ourselves, where it's in terms of the team. Obviously, it's folks don't spend that much of their time just writing out boilerplate or just kind of doing pure like implementation of features, and people get to spend like the much more of their time focused on really just thinking about the core questions of how do we make Devin better? What is the right interface for Devin? What is the right flow or the right set of features that's really going to make this as great of an experience as possible? And that's how we like things. Obviously.
When is the point you reach where there's takeoff of this being like your Devin starts moving so much further ahead of everyone else? Like once you have enough Devins doing all these things, they're just like, whatever, and you're 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years ahead.
Honestly, I think as a community, I think the kind of all of us as engineers around the world, I think we're going to have to think about this and build for this and kind of adapt to these new technologies. But what I would say is I think more and more, and especially as capabilities get better, but certainly, even in steady state today, I think more and more, I think things are going to shift towards this kind of asynchronous flow. And one of the reasons I would say for that is, in the real world, you're just capped by real world constraints, right? And I think that one way to put it is kind of like, and don't take these numbers exactly, but it's kind of like the first order math of it is, of course, being able to write files or to complete this function or complete this line or things like that, it helps a ton. It's a really great experience, right? There's a lot of parts of building software that obviously are almost not that at all, right? It's, you have a bug that you're trying to fix, and so you spin up the local server, you click around on your own product on the front end and try to reproduce the bug yourself. Once you have the error, you take a look at Datadog and you see what happened, and you try to find other errors in the logs. You look at those files and you see what went wrong. You make some edits. Maybe you go and like rerun the whole process again now that to make sure your change looks right. And that's a lot of, what it means to be a software engineer, right? And these are processes that take real time. I think we're going to shift more and more towards this agentic workflow because, that's in some ways it's kind of like the way to really get to the, 200%, 500%, 1,000% gains that we'll be getting to with software engineering over the next few years.
Okay, enough talk. Let's show people what the heck this actually looks like.
Let's do it.
You've got a couple demos prep that show a few use cases that you found helpful. Yeah. So you're going to pull up your screen and then we'll
do it. So,
kick it off and then we'll talk as it's happening.
And so the whole process, obviously, of working with Devin is working asynchronously. And so I thought it'd be cool for us to actually just watch Devin a little bit in action, and then we can go through some other examples of work that Devin's done or things that Devin does for us, even on our team, for example. But then we can check back in asynchronously with our Devin after.
Let's do it.
And so I'll share this real quick. And the key thing I that I would just emphasize here is a lot of it obviously is really just about thinking about as a software engineer or as engineers ourselves or engineering teams. Engineering teams, PMs, and so on. What are the things that we would want to build that we would want to hand off? And so, we have Devin set up with our own Devin code base, for example. And so I'll go ahead and kick off a Devin for that. And so I'll just say, hey, add Devin. I'm on with my friend, Lenny.
Hi, Devin.
Can you modify Devin web app to Let's feature your newsletter as part of the Devin website.
Let's do it. Like on the real Devin website.
Feature Lenny's site.
Lose all your users.
And so we're gonna kick this off. as you can see, Devin gets started instantly and goes ahead and respond. And again, you can work with this asynchronously. You can work with it synchronously as well. For this, we'll just kind of go in a little bit and see exactly what's going on. But as you can see here, Devin's going through files and taking a look through a lot of stuff. And so we can follow here basically as we need to and see what makes sense. You can see Devin's already called out a few particular pieces, right? Where there's the sidebar, which we have implemented on the front end, and there's pieces there, and we're going to have a new component, and that component's going to link to Lenny's website. That all sounds good. Devin's asking us any questions if there's anything that we have here. Same story here, where it's kind of, you can let Devin make its own decisions and hand off, or you can go ahead and be kind of give some more thoughts, right? Should the button open in a new tab or within the application? I'll say let's open it in a new tab.
And you could answer these at any point? Like, is it waiting for you to answer?
You can answer these at any point. You can hand off, hand back on.
But it's not going to be like, just God damn it, I just wrote it this way. Why didn't you tell me earlier?
That's right. Yeah, one of the one of the big pieces, with Devin is Devin will always be enthusiastic. Will always be ready to put in the hours.
Thanks for changing scope. Thanks, guys.
And so we'll give Devin a chance to work, and it's going to go through these files, and it'll make a pull request for us, and we'll see. And go from there. But I thought it'd be fun to show some other examples of Devin in action as well. One of the examples actually this morning, which I just used Devin for, is I asked Devin to help me brush my own facts up for this podcast. And so obviously a huge fan of the podcast and the newsletter. I asked Devin, hey, Devin, I'm going to be on the podcast. Could you please research everything you can about him and make a nice website quiz for me, so that I can make sure I know my facts, right? And so Devin, this was just this morning, I asked Devin to do this, and I'll kind of just show what Devin did. It looks like, went to Wikipedia first. Unfortunately, it's not a page on Wikipedia, which is, Lenny, we'll work on that, I guess.
Not a big enough deal yet.
They did you dirty. I mean, we need a page for this. And so then, then it went and found it on Spotify.
So you're watching what it's researching live.
Yeah. So this is this was this morning, obviously.
And this is a playback of what Devin did. This is
exactly.
This is part of Devin. You could just watch what it did.
Yep. And so especially when you're building engineering projects or something like that, you can see kind of like each of the steps that Devin was doing, or if Devin tested the code locally, obviously you want to be able to go and look and see, what Devin was clicking around with and testing or things like that. So it found the newsletter. It's going and looking at this, right? And it's going and reading all of this, and then it says, okay, let's get started with putting the code together, right? And so it says, hey, I've researched, it's going through and writing all of this, putting the app together. It plays its own quiz itself, actually, which we should just play this quiz. Actually, let's see how much I know. What is the name?
Okay. What is the name of the podcast? Lenny's podcast. Let's, for people not watching, so to say, approximately how many subscribers? 1 million. Very good.
Yeah.
What are 3 main topics Lenny's focuses on? Oh, product growth and career. Very good. It's a good quiz. I think a lot of people. What does Lenny's do besides podcasting? Okay,
I would say angel investing, and advising.
Okay.
How often does Lenny publish?
Quiz.
Once a week, right?
Once a week.
And so we can go through all these and do all these. I took this quiz, by the way, obviously to make sure that I was well prepped. But yeah, this is kind of one of the more fun examples, obviously, of just like
Scott. How many subscribers do I have in my newsletter?
Over 1 million, actually. Yeah. And then one last one I'll show, and then maybe we can come back to our initial run after. But is like I was saying, like a lot of this is really built to work with all of the existing code workflows out there, and so. For example, we were doing some exploration with the DeepSeek repository on GitHub, and we imported it into Devin, and we got our own fork of it set up in Devin. And a couple of things I just wanted to show here. One is Devin sets up its whole wiki with all of its internal understanding. And so when Devin indexes the code base, obviously building a representation of the code base and learning it and improving it over time is one of the big things that Devin does. And funnily enough, we found that naturally, humans really are interested to understand this code-based representation as well. And so Devin Wiki is something that we built here, and you can take a look at all of these different pieces and see each of these different things. Here are the FP8 operations. Here's an SGLang integration. There's diagrams of how the different layers are built and put together. There's deployment operations. There's a lot of details about the architecture as well. And you can ask questions about it as well. And so, for example, you can say, how does DeepSeek handle multi-token prediction designed for SpecDeck? and it'll go through and it's able to kind of search through the entire code base and give you an informed answer based off of that. And so we use this a lot, and it helps when you're scoping out a task for Devin and doing an initial prompt. It also helps, obviously, just in a vacuum. Like, you often have questions about your code base that are really nice, right?
This episode is brought to you by Attio, the AI native CRM. Attio is built to scale with your business from day one. Connect your email and calendar, and Attio instantly builds a CRM that matches your business model with all of your company's contacts and interactions enriched with actionable insights. Sync in your product's usage, billing info, or any other data sources, and Attio's flexible data model will handle it all without any rigid templates or workarounds. With Attio, AI isn't just a feature, it's the foundation. You can do things like instantly prospect and route leads with research agents, get real-time insights from AI using customer conversations, and build powerful AI automations for your most complex workflows. Industry leaders like Flatfile, Replicate, and Modal are already experiencing what's next for CRM. Go to attio.com/Lenny to get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/Lenny. Something that I've learned as I've been talking to more and more AI building companies and apps is there's a big difference in how large of a code base they could integrate into.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for companies that are existing versus startups, people that have large existing code base. How should people think about what kind of code base Devin can plug into?
Yeah. So we go all the way to the biggest code bases possible, right? And one way I'd kind of put it is, how the way that we as engineers would think about a large code base is certainly, when you're making changes or when you're thinking about a particular task, you're not bringing in every single line of the code base at once, right? You have a high level abstraction that you're able to think about and look into, right? And then you're obviously able to zoom in and get to kind of higher resolution on each of these different things, right? And so Devin works in much the same way, where the first thing it'll do is it's going to kind of figure out like the high level architecture of what's going on here and what this is built for and so on. But within each of the components, it's obviously also going to be able to zoom in and give some more detail about each of these. And so here's FP8 to bfloat 16 and how exactly a lot of that is set up, right? Here's each of the different parts of the code base. And so similarly, it's we've built this to be scalable.
It's essentially coming back to the engineer as architect is now it's helping you understand the architecture. It's kind of circling back to that.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the fun use cases that we've seen actually with folks is they'll often actually use Devin, get Devin's help to onboard new engineers on the team, right? And when you're new and you're joining, there's obviously a lot of questions that you have about the code base or about how things are set up. It also sometimes can be a little bit awkward to ask your mentor or your manager the questions, and if you're worried that they're going to be really dumb questions, right? And so it's nice to just be able to ask Devin and to go through Devin's wiki and to understand these internal representations, right?
I think that's really interesting because it comes back to your point that Devin is not just a junior engineer. It's what you call a jagged engineer.
A jagged intelligence.
Jagged intelligence, where it's almost like a staff engineer at understanding the code base. Usually you have to ask an engineer that's been there a long time, what does this do? Where's this thing? How does this work? And it feels like Devin's very good at that.
Yeah. Obviously, in the retrieval and kind of processing a lot of code and a lot of tokens at once is, something that language models are really great at, right? And so basically being able to get those gains and in the places that you need them is really great. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. You got a couple more use cases.
One last flow I'll show is just, we just rolled this out last week actually, but it's a full kind of Devin automation setup with Linear, right? And so, if you have tasks that you're doing on the DeepSeek repository, for example, and it's all set up, all you have to do is you just add the Devin label and Devin will come through and it'll give you this, right? And it's going to give you its thoughts on what the task looks like. And, you can take a look at each of the particular files that you see, or it'll point out snippets that it thinks are important. And from there, if you feel good about what was built, or the conclusions that we came to, then you can just start off a Devin session that will go and actually do that work. So
that is insane. Like, that sounds like such a simple idea, but essentially what you're saying is there are tasks in Linear that are fixes and features, and now Devin just goes off and can just do them for you.
Yeah, and so it's definitely like it's a hands-on process. You certainly want to be involved when Devin is scoping out the task or giving you its thoughts. And the nice thing too, by the way, is Devin will give you its confidence level, and here's how likely I think I am to really understand this piece or that piece or whatever, right? But but it helps make things a lot faster, right? And to your point, it's like a lot of product managers, for example, obviously love to be able to use Devin and Linear to understand things better, the code base better, or things like that. And Claire Vo, for example, from Launch Darkly is a big Devin user, and she loves basically going and scoping out tasks or asking data questions or asking, hey, what's going on, or like, is this merged into production yet, or is this a feature flag right now, or what percent of people are getting this or that feature? It's a clean way basically to make that intelligence much more accessible.
I love just like with the integration with Linear that you can still keep it really simple. You add a little ticket like, hey, add this link to this homepage do this, and Devin will be really good at understanding what you mean and then show you, here's what I'm thinking. Is this right?
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So Devin did finish working. It seems like there's something going on with the CI and it's debugging that right now, but it went ahead and put up the initial first pass pull request, and we can take a look. And
let's do it.
It's this is the Devin website, obviously in this custom deploy, and we have Lenny's newsletter right here.
Let's ship this to production. Let's go. Or don't be so confused.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. Show it again real quick. So
Yeah,
just
yeah.
added it to the homepage of Devin.
Yeah. So
Cognition Labs.
Devin obviously has access to our Devin code base. It does a
Right.
lot in here, and so it's super familiar with all the pieces here.
Beautiful.
And it said,
I like how that looks.
We've got Devin
This is-
Search, we
this
got
is a
Devin
winner.
Wiki, and we've
This is
got
gonna
Lenny's newsletter.
Drive some great growth. I'll link to your site. You link to my site. We'll get some page rank going.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a good example? Oh, there it is. What a beautiful website
Yeah.
for my newsletter. Is that just like a good example of the kind of thing Devin is very good at? Like, here's a very specific thing to change on the website. How should people think about what Devin is very good at and maybe where it starts to fall apart?
The way that we often describe it is, I think Devin is best when it is working on tasks that are well-defined. It's one way to put it is you want to be giving Devin tasks, not problems, right? And a lot of these things, like what you just saw, which was kind of like a quick front-end feature request or a bug fix or adding testing and documentation or things like that. One of the things that makes a loop really nice, obviously, is a quick way to iterate and test. And so with something like this, obviously, super easy for us, for example, to just go pull up the preview and see that the link worked, right? Obviously, it would be easy for Devin to do as well. Devin will often go and log into Devin and start a Devin session and make sure it's, when it's working on our own code base, which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, you generally want something that is kind of like easy to verify and easy to test is the main thing. And you can work on bigger projects or bigger asks as well, obviously. But in that case, you should certainly expect to need to steer Devin more to make sure you're really, to make sure it's going the right direction.
It's interesting because that's very similar to the way people talk about synthetic data and reinforcement learning, creating data that's very easy. There's like a very definitive answer, yes and no.
Yeah.
And it's very clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. What's something that you guys debated a lot as you were just designing and building Devin?
I'll give a couple that come to mind. One I would say is, a question of, I'll call it like how opinionated we should be. We had the workflows that we used to Devin for, which was very much, as you can see, for, basically integrating to our Slack and GitHub, making pull requests for us in our repos, responding to issue reports or things like that. And naturally, we've had certainly a lot of other, kind of different things that have come up that folks have tried. I mean, we have folks who like order their DoorDash with Devin, for example, even, and we have folks who certainly, a lot of people who are kind of building cool websites from scratch or working on things like that. And yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting trade-off for us where I think the way that I would describe it is, in our product, certainly, the large bulk of the features that we build are for this kind of like, making pull requests and engineering teams use case. But I think basically our kind of general stance with all the others is obviously if folks want to use Devin for that, that's great. And we want to just kind of make sure that they're fully aware about the limitations and about where things get caught up. It's funny with AI, and especially because, I would say one of the most common pieces of startup advice out there, I would say is, focus on a really niche cohort, do things that don't scale, make one use case that's really great, right? And then you grow from there. And I think that's, I think that's great advice across the board. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because, I think with generative AI, you naturally see this where a lot of product experiences can turn out to be more general, right? And so it's an interesting trade-off for us. This is something that we still always go back and forth on how much do we want to, to do more to support all the other kind of use cases out there and to handle other things that folks might want to do with Devin. I think another one that comes to mind is how much Devin should be, let's say, like a single comprehensive project experience versus like a suite of tools. And as you can see here, we have Devin Search, we have Devin Wiki, we have the linear ticket scoping, and certainly, these tools interact with each other. But I think as time's gone on, we've seen it more and more as really building this suite of tools. And I think that, I think the core agent experience and the core kind of agent that will go off and build each of these, build things for you, for example, is always, of course, going to be, that's Devin, and that is like the core piece. I think that will always be what's really special about our work. But I think that all of the other features out there, there is a complex suite of work that's required for real world software engineering, and engineering is just messy at the end of the day, right? And so I think there are a lot of different flows and a lot of different use cases that make sense. And an obvious thing to point out is you could ask the same questions to Devin Search as you could to Devin. Right. And Devin will go through and it'll do the same thing. It'll go through and look through the files and give you an answer and stuff. But with that said, on the one hand, I think on the capability side, there's certainly a lot you can do to really optimize things for very specifically question answer about this repository. And that made sense to really kind of build into a specific kind of feature. And then on the other side, I would say we found that users actually really like having this axis of control, right? Sometimes you have a task that you're thinking about, but you actually don't want Devin to get started on the task just yet. You want to ask Devin and understand what parts of the code base might be relevant, right? And so you want to be very direct about saying, like, this is just an ask, and I just want to see the snippets of the code base that relate, right? Or I just want to look at the wiki and understand the existing representation. And so it's kind of on both the capabilities and on the UX side, we've found that that's kind of what's naturally made sense over time.
Let's talk about the landscape then of just other companies in the space, which is something a lot of people are always thinking about. There's all these different approaches. You guys are going full on AI engineer. There's obviously IDE companies. There's also just like models being built that are really good at engineering. Everyone's kind of starting to build agents now. You guys are ahead on this in a lot of ways. Like OpenAI just recently said they're going to build a software engineering agent. Anthropic's got something there. Cursor and Windsurf have their own little agents, and Replit. Thoughts on just kind of where you guys fit in the landscape, and then how you think you win long term? How do you think about that?
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think all of these are incredible teams. I think, really smart and really forward-thinking folks who are building a lot of great products out there. And it's, I think there's a lot to do, honestly, over the next few years with the advent of AGI or whatever you want to call it. I think one of the quotes that I love is in 2017, if you asked if we had AGI, the answer is no. And in 2025, if you ask if we have AGI, the answer is, well, you have to define AGI, and it depends on your subject. Yeah, right. And I think it does kind of get to the point of I mean, there is a lot of really amazing stuff happening. I think that it's easy to underrate, I would say, just how big of a shift it is that we're seeing, right? Where I think there are a lot of great products out there, for example, over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years that have made each of these kind of these different niches of the life cycle of building a product a little bit easier, for example, right? There's great products out there for instant response. There's great products out there for logging. There's great products out there for billing. There's, all of these different tools, right? And the obvious thing is, what we're seeing with AI is all of these spaces are going to be moving multiple times faster, and it's going to be like an order of magnitude shift, if anything, right? And so I think from our perspective, we've obviously had a very specific lens that we've bet on this whole time, and that is, autonomous coding agents. And there's a lot of problems to solve there, to be honest, right? Like there's still a ton to do on the core capabilities, certainly. And, we see cases all the time where it's like, wow, why did Devin make that decision? That seems, no human engineer would have ever done that. There's all sorts of spots where, with the product interface, there's obviously a lot to think about. And I think it's by the way, not just like a single thing that we're working towards, but something that will change with every addition of capabilities. Like I kind of think of it as like there's 20 generations of agent product, agent coding experiences to come. I think the one that we'll get to over the course of several years is probably something where you don't even look at the code at all, right? And you're actually just looking at your own product, and you're just able to look and specify and say, hey, this button should be a little bit rounder. Let's do that. And by the way, let's add a new tab here. And maybe we should save this information. Let's start up a database table and let's index it on X, Y, and Z columns. and you're just, basically working with your products in real time and having your agent build out those things for you. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of generations, in between here and there. But I think the product experience itself is going to change every single time. And then obviously, there's all of the practicality of just getting it out there in the world. And so, folks obviously need to learn how to use the new technology. There's a lot to do to deploy into all of the messiness of real world software. There's a lot of COBOL out there still. There's a lot of Fortran out there still. There's lots of kind of abstractions and details that folks have done. And so I think from our perspective, we have been since the beginning have been laser focused on agentic coding. And that is the one thing that we've really believed in. It's the one thing that we've designed for. And, that goes all the way to even the revenue model with ACUs and having the usage-based setup. It goes into, obviously, all the product experiences of thinking how, okay, like where do you want to talk to Devin? You want to be able to talk to Devin in Slack. You want to be able to spin this up from your issue tracker. You want to be able to, all of these things. And then, of course, the capabilities. And so I think it's, I don't think there's any one easy answer. I think it's obviously a combination of things, but this is really this has been the space that we've lived in and spent all of our time in for the last year and a half. And it's going to be that way for the next 5 or 10 years too. So
along these lines, a big question everyone always has in AI is moats and defensibility. It's a question I've been asking every founder that comes on. How do you just think about how to build a moat in this space when it's so much easier to build and these models are, so much is built on these models that are themselves advancing so quickly?
I'd give one slight kind of tweak on that, which is I think it's often less about moats and more about stickiness. And what I mean by that is, moats are in some sense, typically what folks mean by a moat is something that means that a competitor couldn't even enter, the market. And I agree that at a high level, a lot of different folks at different layers of the AI spectrum, the foundation labs or the application layer or so on, I don't think there's any kind of like hard barrier that would prevent others from entering. I think what does exist is stickiness, which I would kind of define as, once you have a product experience that you really like, are you excited to keep using that experience? Or is there kind of like, is there an effect where it is just as easy from now on to just switch onto a new one and learn a new one and so on, right? And I think from that perspective, I think there's a few things that are really great about coding agents in particular. One I would say is there is a lot of just inherent kind of stickiness and learning and build up over time, which is that as you use Devin and as your whole team uses Devin, it's the same thing with an engineer, right? If you're joining on day one versus, so you've been at the company for 5 years, you wrote half the code yourself. You've touched every file, you've built every single piece, right? All the engineers. And so similarly, it's like Devin will really learn and build its representation of your code base and of your stack and of your process over time. And we'll be able to do a lot more with that. And then the other piece of it, which I think is really exciting, I'd say, is there really is a lot to do of what I would kind of call like a multiplayer aspect of code, which if you think about it is how a lot of things get done in the real world, certainly, right? And so, it's one thing to have, your own experience, which you use yourself as just an engineer. But, for example, ourselves, like we see this all the time where some engineers are working with Devin and teaching Devin things. And as I mentioned, like folks will have Devin onboard their new engineers and kind of convey that knowledge to them, right? Or similarly, it's like, I'll start a session with Devin in Slack and I'll say, hey, it'd be cool if we could do this thing. And some other engineer will chime in and say, oh, by the way, like the reason we did it initially was X and Y. And so Devin, just make sure when you do this change that you still support that workflow. And Devin will say, okay, sounds great, right? Or Devin will make a PR, I'll be working with Devin, we'll make a pull request in GitHub and somebody else will be reviewing that PR or give some comments and Devin will work on that too, right? You'll be in linear. And so all these kind of spaces, it really does just kind of set up for an experience where basically where Devin can just grow in the value that it can provide for your whole work over time. And so I think from that perspective, like if anything, it's, we want there to be a lot of innovation and a lot of new products and so on. I don't think that the goal is to try to lock other people out of building. There's a lot of stuff to build, and I think there's going to be a lot of different experiences. I think from our perspective, what we think about is more like, how can we make Devin more and more and more useful as you're using it more?
It's very similar. We had Michael from Cursor, the CEO of Cursor, on the podcast, and he had a similar point of just he thinks moats are just kind of like consumer, like Google is the way he thinks it's like Google, where people can easily switch. You just have to stay the best, and that's the answer.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're adding to that of just like, but also if you can create some stickiness where it is very hard to leave because it's so good at what it's doing and it's built knowledge and integrated to your workflows that it builds on that stickiness.
And I think one of the things that's nice about our space too is software engineering, for better or for worse, is has a very clear tie to value. And what it means is, I guess one way to put it is there is always kind of like a clear next level, at least for the next while. I think there could be some point where you're just like, all right, just build the entirety of YouTube for me. And Devin just does the whole thing. It's like, there's probably been like 100 million hours of human engineering time building YouTube, building the algorithm, building all the infrastructure, all of the everything, every little detail. And like, maybe there's some time where Devin just does that out of the box, that's obviously going to be a long time from now. I think on the interim, on every level in between, obviously it's, it makes a difference, the quality of software engineering. And I think one of the cool things with developers, obviously, is developers are really willing to learn new experiences and to put in effort if it means that they're able to have a higher and higher quality experience. So
awesome. I'm going to spend a little time on the tech that enables Devin without divulging trade secrets. Just what allowed you to make Devin so good? Was there like an unlock with a certain model? Some folks have shared like 3.0 Sonnet 3.5 was a huge unlock for a lot of their products. Just what's kind of the key to the way you've architected or built Devin that makes it work so well?
We obviously, we've been betting on agents for a long time. I think that agents were doable and workable like a lot earlier than most folks might have thought. But certainly, I think as the community has really rallied around it, I mean, you see the impacts of that in the pre-training. You see the impacts of that in a lot of the work that's done with these models. I actually don't think there's been any, like from our perspective, I don't think there's been any single like step function base model shift or anything that has been kind of like a night and day difference in Devin. But I certainly think that the curve of, every point on the chart, I mean, there's a new model that comes out every week now, has obviously made a big difference in terms of what we've been able to do. And then obviously on top of that, we work with the research teams at all these foundation labs to do a lot of our work on top. And so I think that my hot take here, which I would give, is I think in terms of base intelligence, we're basically already there. And I think a lot of what we see actually, and what we spend our time on, is less so. Obviously, we don't pre-train our own models or things like that. It's less so like increasing the base IQ of a model, for example, and more about kind of like teaching it all of the idiosyncrasies of real world engineering, right? And thinking about, here's how you use Datadog and do this, and here's how you might diagnose this error, and here are the different things that you could run into, and here's how you handle each of those. And when you're ready, here's how you make a GitHub PR. And, this is true in engineering. It's true in every other space as well. I mean, there's so much detail and idiosyncrasy to the work that we all do, obviously, day to day. And a lot of it is kind of like teaching the model to mirror the complexity of the real world, I would say, rather than kind of like getting it to some higher fundamental level of problem solving, which I think the foundation labs are doing a really great job of.
There's something you shared when we were chatting before we started recording around the growth of previous kind of transformative technologies were very hardware oriented, and there was like a limiting factor to their growth, and AI is not that. Can you just share that insight?
For a number of reasons, I think AI is going to be the biggest technology shift of our lives. But I think one thing, which is what we were just talking about before this, which is most of the big tech revolutions that we've had over the last 50 years. I mean, I'm thinking about like personal computer and the internet and the mobile phone and stuff. They all had this big hardware component that was a big part of the distribution, right? And so, you had the internet, and initially it was just these universities that were talking with one another. But obviously, over time, we got the whole world plugged into the internet, and it took years and years and years. The same thing was true with the mobile phone. The same thing was true with the PC, right? And the thing that's interesting about that in particular, which is, I would say, we're already seeing the effects of that, is, in these hardware distribution regimes, obviously there's a lot that depends on real time, right? And so, folks who were building for those industries kind of saw their market grow and grow and grow, basically steadily year over year, as the number of people with mobile phones increased, right? As the number of people connected to the internet increased, right? And many of those businesses, it's still crazy to think, but many of those businesses got started right in the beginning. I mean, like Apple and Microsoft were started like right around the same time, and the same is true for a lot of the great internet businesses or wherever. But certainly it was kind of like it was something that touched the whole world, with time, or a large fraction of the whole world, and it had a really massive impact. But it took place over several years, right, because of the time that it took. And I think one of the things which is already, I'd say, different in AI is just how explosive the technology can be. Once AI code, and I think we're firmly in the, in past the inflection point in AI code, right, where it's, as an engineer, if you're not using AI at all to write code, I mean, you're falling behind, honestly. And it is a technology that everyone should have and should be using. And there's no kind of there's no weight on hardware distribution that is causing that. And it means that the space is just growing so exponentially, basically.
Michael Pollan has this interesting point that cliches are cliches because they're so true. And that's why they're like cliches. Like, I heard that a million times. And I think it's like, people hear this like, yeah, I know, but like, it's actually insane what is happening. Yeah. That's why you're here, to help us through this transition.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fun time. And I think there will be, real investment and real work that it takes. But I think from the perspective of us as engineers, for example, I think it just means it's so important to stay in the loop with everything that's happening. And it's, as we're seeing, it's not only because of your learning and your ability to work these technologies, but it's also, about basically like teaching the AI, what there is to know about your code base in order to make it really effective at building with you and doing more of the things that you would want it to do. So
along those lines, for people listening that they're like, hey, we should be using Devin at our company, what are things you've found to be helpful in helping an engineer at a company get adoption and be able to use Devin, either culturally or logistically?
So a pattern which we often see with folks is there will be a few folks at the team who are really excited and want to try out the new thing, and they want to put in the investment and are really excited to get it going. And they'll go through all the setup. They'll give Devin the repos. They'll teach Devin how to run the lint and the CI and all of those details, right? And they'll start off by giving it those initial tasks and kind of like help Devin build a foothold, basically. And as time goes on, eventually folks will see, wow, Devin's writing all these PRs. Devin's doing this.
Who's this Devin person that just joined the company is just knocking out PRs?
Yeah, and they'll see that, and then naturally they'll get on and they'll get an account. And one of the cool things, of course, is by the time they join, Devin already knows a good amount of detail about the repositories that they're already working in, and they're working with that. And so one of the really cool things which we often see is, that the early adopters themselves can really pave the way, I think, for everyone else on the team. But yeah, I think the main thing I would just kind of call out is, it really does take, it's a very different product experience, right? And I think it's, for what it's worth, I think there's still a lot more that we should be, that we can do to make it as intuitive and as clear as possible to folks, like how to use Devin and what the right steps are and how to really maximize value out of Devin. But I think that, it's the kind of thing where if you put in the investment and understand exactly what it takes to get Devin to be successful, it's like, we've found ourselves that as time has gone on, we just use Devin more and more and more with every next update. So
let me follow that thread. There's a question I ask every AI app building founder, which is, if you could sit next to every new user of Devin and whisper something in their ear to help them be successful with Devin, like 1 or 2 tips, what would those tips be?
I think the biggest thing I would say is, it really is just, treat Devin like your new junior engineer. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think folks come in and, they see the blank page and they think of all sorts of kind of like various things that they want to try out. They think of lots where, I think typically the flow that we see that works best is, obviously, you can try demos, you can do things, but a lot of it is just like, let's figure out what tickets we want to get done today or this week, and let's have Devin get started on those. And let's start with the kind of the easier ones, and then work with Devin and understand like what things Devin needs to get set up to be able to test its own code and do this well. And then let's scale up over time. And then obviously it's as you work with your engineer, you understand better kind of how to communicate with them or what are the right tasks or projects to bring them in on. But I think that's that really is the one-liner for us.
Okay. There's a question I've been meaning to ask. I just want to get back to this because it's something I think a lot about with Devins. Everyone's going to have 5 Devins, let's say 10 Devins. Everyone's kind of turning into basically an eng manager. with a bunch of junior engineers.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily the best job in the world because it's just a bunch of review. At least you don't have to do performance reviews and one-on-ones. But, it's like sitting around, checking a lot of PRs all day. There's a sense of you become an architect, and which is kind of what every engineer wants to become eventually, right? They're all like, I just want to think about the architecture. I don't want to code all these stupid fixed bugs. So I get that that's, there's a good side to that. But just I imagine you're thinking a lot about this, just like how do you make life pleasant and fun and enjoyable as basically an edge manager of, say, 500 Devons in the future?
Yeah, I can just imagine the performance. It's Devin, you've done a really great job on your task, but I really would like you to be more proactive in the team meetings. So what I'd say, it's funny actually, because it's something that, in terms of the wording that we've thought a lot about as well. It's just, we've used the term like manager of Devons in the past, which of course I think is a big part of it. But I think that the only thing I would point out here is I do think, I think that the bricklayer versus architect is closer to the experience than being a manager, because I think a lot of the difficulty of management or the reason that that people shy away from it is more because of a lot of the kind of various, let's say, like there's kind of like all of the kind of like the context and the ownership and kind of like the responsibility and stuff, and then there's also kind of all of the emotional aspects of it, right? Where I think working with Devin is a little more like just being kind of like having an interface to hand off tasks and build tasks, right? And so the parallel that I would kind of draw is, when we invented Python, obviously, like we didn't, it's like in many ways, the description and the outlining of tasks, it was like a different paradigm, but I think it was nowhere near, what folks typically think of as kind of like management bureaucracy today, right? And I think that with Devin, a lot of it is just kind of like, it's more like finding the right levels of abstraction that you could work with Devin on, and just kind of like finding the workflows that work really well. And the obvious thing to say here is it's a very, it's like you can always have Devin take a first pass at things, right? And so, you can take the first pass, you have Devin take the first pass, if it's great, you merge it right away. If it's, if it needs some touch up, you can obviously give that feedback, for example. But a lot of it is like, it's more about basically like making Devin part of your flow than it is, losing control, which I think is the main thing that folks are scared of with management.
Are you thinking about a manager Devin, like a Devin that manages other Devins?
Yeah. So for what it's worth, Devin can start other Devins through the API, right? And so we've seen this happen quite a bit of times where naturally, if you have some big task that you want to do, like, Devin will do this all the time. It'll chunk up and then parallelize into smaller Devins. And so it's the kind of thing that you need to give Devin the credentials to be able to do that. It's not currently something that is kind of like default enabled, but I can certainly imagine as time goes on that there's more and more of that.
Devins all the way down.
Yeah. I think the thing that's kind of interesting too is like, with humans, the way I almost say it in technical terms is like there's this coupling of a context and a thread. And what I mean by that is like basically each human can only operate, single threaded on the work that they do, and they have their set of contexts. And then there's other humans obviously who can do other stuff at the same time, but they have their own context, right? With agents, one of the cool things is you can have an agent that's doing multiple lines of exploration at once, but is sharing all of the context of everything that they find. And so I think that this is very early, and I think we'll see this, but folks obviously love to talk about basically like systems of agents communicating with one another. And I think that there will be a lot of new paradigms to build for once we get there.
And it's so interesting what you said about the decision between having one Devin and only one Devin do all the things, and you just tell them things and they kind of fire off jobs, versus you have 5 Devins and they're each doing individual things. It's such an interesting decision to make.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, 2 more questions. What's maybe the most counterintuitive thing you've learned so far building Devin that maybe goes against startup wisdom, common startup wisdom?
Something I've thought about a lot lately as we've built this is, this is not my first company. Actually, for a lot of us, it's not our first company. Like I think of our 26 or 27 people total on the team, like I think 18 of us have started our own company before this. And yeah, like one of the things I think about is, Actually, your point about cliches, I think really, really spoke to me as well, which is there's kind of the really common things which you hear all the time in startups, where you're like, you got to move fast, or you got to hire great people. It's like, okay, well, obviously you do, like I wasn't planning on not hiring great people. I wasn't planning on going slow. And similarly, it's like, yeah, you really got to build something that people want. Right. And there's kind of these like 3 to 5 things which are always repeated, and they're always the common wisdom in startups. And I definitely had this idea as a founder when I was starting initially that, all right, so those are the kind of the 3 to 5 basic things. But as you get really deep into it, you spend a lot of years into it, you learn all of the thousands of other things that you have to learn to be, to build a company, right? And I think to some extent that's of course true. And there's lots of little details that you'll get into with all these different things, right? Including team building and product and strategy and engineering decision making and fundraising and sales and every other component, right? But I also realized that as time has gone on, more and more I felt like building companies well sometimes just comes down to doing those 3 to 5 things just even more than you could possibly expect. And so with us, it's like, everyone says to go fast, but it's like, yeah, we had a hackathon in November. We had another hackathon in December. We started the company officially in January. We got the prototypes out to initial users in February. We did a launch in March. We got our first customers in April. It's just like basically like truly pushing the pace in every spot where we possibly could has really made a difference for us. And similarly, it's like, yeah, everyone always says, you should hire great people. But I think that the truth within that truth is basically like, you should fight to all ends, basically, to get the folks that you really want to bring in. And it's, one of my favorite stories to share is we had a candidate who came and interviewed. He was a junior at MIT. So he was very, very young, and we gave him an interview. And he did way better than almost any of the full-time, like the full-time candidates that we had ever talked to. And so we said, hey, what do you think about taking some time off of school and working with us and building out Devon? Like, we really think you're just going to be able to come in and just have a ton of impact already from day one. And he thought about it for a while, and he came back and he said, what, I'm down. I want to do it, but my parents really want me to graduate from school, and I'm just not sure there's a way to make it work. And so so we talked to him more and kind of just understood the situation. And then, and then we flew to North Carolina, went straight from the airport to his parents' house, had dinner with him and his parents. We talked a lot. It's a really, really nice Gujarati family. We kind of gave them some gifts and just talked to them about it and tried to understand, all right, it's like, what would it take and what will we need to make work? And they just said, it sounds like a great opportunity, but we really want our son to be able to graduate, right? And we talked that through, and we figured out a setup basically where he could work for us essentially full time, but then come in for his required classes and do what he needed to do to get the diploma, basically, but no more than that. And we talked that through, and then we got to a point where everyone was happy with that, and then we went straight back to the airport and flew right back, basically. And that was it was the first and only time that I've ever been in North Carolina. It was just a great trip, and it's the kind of thing where it's like, hiring great people is one thing, but truly just never giving up and really giving it everything that you can to make it work for people who really make sense to be on the team. And he's been with us on the team for over a year now, and he's been an incredible engineer, and we wouldn't be here without him. And similarly, we had someone else who was, again, really, really talented candidate, did amazingly well, very young, and had a lot of great offers at a lot of other companies. And we were talking to them about, he wanted to start his own company someday as well. And we were talking to him about, certainly, a lot of the obvious things, which are kind of like having him meet our investors or work with, get to do work with customers or see a lot of these other components, so that when the time came, that he would have all the experience he needed to start his own company. But the other thing that, that one of the other things that was big is like, he really, he was talking with a lot of great companies already. He didn't want to burn any bridges. And so we actually worked with him and basically hand wrote all of his rejection responses to each of the other companies, and kind of worked with him on it to say, like, here's how you should say it in a way that's, going to come off as like, that you really did appreciate the time with them, and that you obviously, you want to remain close with them and stay in touch. And it was the kind of thing, obviously, where it's like, look, obviously it's our job is to make sure that he's happy enough that he doesn't want to leave anytime in the near future. But I think it's the kind of thing where, the way that you put together a really, really great team is by really by fighting for what's right for them too. So
Wow. Those are incredible stories. And it makes so real these, as you say, cliches, hire the best people. Like this is what it sounds like to hire the best people. This is what it takes.
yeah, no, and I was just saying, it's just like, a lot of things. Yeah, we've fought very hard to just kind of like reimagine things from the ground up, because it's a lot of it really is just thinking about like where do we think the technology is going over the next 5 to 10 years, and what is the place that we want to have in that future. So
I wonder if people are going to be fighting for the best devins someday. There's going to be like 10x devins.
Yeah,
They're so smart.
like, I'll give you, overtime pay, benefits, free healthcare and everything, and then the devins like, yeah,
Trade devins like Magic the Gathering cards.
yeah.
And then just going back to your 3 to 5 things. So essentially, this is incredible advice. Essentially, it's like you always hear, hire the best people, move fast, build things people want.
Yeah, build something people want. Stay as close as possible to your customers, right? And then I think the other thing is just always think about where things are going, not where they are today. I feel like those are kind of like the 5 things, which is especially in AI with things moving so fast and there's so much great talent. I feel like a lot of these are even more true, where it's kind of like it's not just thinking about where things are going to be in 10 years. It's like thinking about what's going to happen next week, and it's obviously things are moving very quickly, and it is very hard to predict, but you really have to, you really have to be very, very rigorous with yourself, I'd say, about like thinking through those things and evaluating all of the kind of the decisions that you make in that lens.
And staying focused is the big takeaway to me here, is like, it ends up feeling like there's 1,000 things you should do, but it's always these 5 things.
Yeah.
Scott, we covered a lot of ground. We went through every question I had, which is great. Is there anything else that you want to share? Anything else you want to leave your listeners with? Maybe a final nugget or something really you want to double down on that we said before we let you go?
The biggest thing that comes to mind for me is, there's a lot of different perceptions about AI, right? There's I think every emotion under the sun right now. There's a lot of fear, for example. There's also a lot of skepticism, and we're very skeptical types as well, and we always want to kind of try it ourselves to really see it and believe it. And I think the main thing that comes to mind for me is, I'm honestly really optimistic about what we're building here with AI, and not just with code and with Devin, but the whole space and everything that's getting done. And I think one of the cool things that is really actively happening is just the ability for everyone to multiply themselves. And that's how we've always thought about it. It's how we've thought about what we're building. And it's, I think there is a lot more to do out there in the world. I'm not too worried about us running out of things to do. And from that lens, I think the thing that we've always been most excited about is how can we all do more?
I hear you, Scott. Well, with that optimism, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. First question, what are 2 or 3 books that you find yourself recommending most to other people?
In terms of nonfiction, I think for folks in startups, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed is just learning and understanding the history of Silicon Valley. And there's it's all of these things that we think about. Somebody invented them. I mean, it's one of the great realizations I feel like is like, it's somebody invented the idea of a seed round, right? Somebody invented the idea of venture capital. Somebody invented the idea of like product market fit, and all of these different principles that we talk about. And so for that, there's a book called The Power Law by Sebastian Mallaby, which I really like. It basically is just kind of like a tour of many of the great businesses and the great products that have been built over the last 60, 70 years in Silicon Valley, which I really love. I think in terms of fiction, it's I actually have always really liked The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's one of my personal favorites as a fiction book.
Do you have a favorite recent movie or TV show that you've really enjoyed?
I have to admit, I have not watched. I can't think of a single movie or TV show that I have watched in the last while. So I'm sure there's. I'm looking forward to watching a lot of great ones post AGI.
That's got to be in the trailer. That's great. I like that. And that just shows how hard you're working, just how much it is going on and how fast everything's moving. Do you have a favorite product you've recently discovered that you really love? Could be an app, could be something physical, could be a toothbrush.
One I would say is, I got an Aura frame recently. It's just like a frame that shows photos, and you can show a new photo every day or every hour or every 15 minutes or whatever you like. And I've really enjoyed it a lot. I think it's it's a nice way to just have picture frame with memories that come up. And then the other thing I would say as like a general purpose thing, it's not particularly new, but I would say I think AirPods are actually extremely well built and well designed. I realize now that it's like, I basically use them for all sorts, I'm taking calls on a walk and I'm using AirPods. I'm like doing work at my computer at my desk. I'm plugged into AirPods and it works quite well, honestly, for a lot of different situations. And they're very comfortable. They're very consistent.
I'm going to double down on the Aura frame. I got one of these for my mom and my mother-in-law, and they're so great for just like sharing photos of your kids with your family. And people have they've heard of digital picture frames, but the Aura just does it really well. And it's really easy to add photos, and they're just really nice looking.
You can imagine, not that long from now, we'll have the Aura frame, except it, Studio Ghiblifies every photo that you have in it. And then, it's,
Or just imagines things you've done that are really cool. Look at my sweet life. Yeah, cool. And it's Aura. It's Aura, I believe, is how you spell it. If folks want to check it out, we'll link to it. Not affiliated. Okay, 2 more questions. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often come back to and find useful in work or in life?
Yeah, something I've thought about a lot is a lot of the proverbs out there are actually contradictions, right? It's like, birds of a feather, and then you also have like opposites attract, right? You have, and it's kind of funny because it's, you feel that both of them are true, and often they both are true, and a lot of it is about like understanding why. And one of those that I feel like, especially in the world of startups, that I think about like all the time is, I think it is very important to be focused and driven and to really kind of maximize your potential. And then at the same time, it's also very important to not let your own personal emotion get tied up in your success or failure, And I think especially with startups, because there's always ups and downs, honestly, even in the most successful companies ever. Like it is just like, it's a rocky road. There's a lot that happens and a lot that goes down. And I think one of the things which I've thought a lot about is that somehow it's, you really want to do your best and put everything you can into it and do everything you can to basically, you want to put it all out on the field, but at the same time, you want to be okay with both wins and losses, right? And you want to be able to move on and go into the next one with each time. And something, I mean, it's funny, but what I've found personally is that obviously it's really important for your own emotional state and mental state to be able to do that. And we've had lots of mistakes, and I've had a lot of, I had my first company, which was cool, but there were a lot of like tricky spots there. And then over the course of Cognition, I mean, feels like it's been already like 8 years compressed into like 1 year, and it's still going at that pace. But it's somehow it also actually makes you more successful, I think too. It's like you are just more able to give it your best and to do the things that will lead to success if you're not tying it up in your own personal worth. So
that is so interesting. I just had a podcast recording recently with an executive coach, Jerry Colonna, that I think will come out before this, might be after this. That's one of his big pieces of advice, and it's a very Buddhist approach of just not clinking and attaching to an outcome.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. I'm curious if there's a story here, but we could keep it short. Is there a story behind Devin as the name, or is there another contender for Devin being the agent?
Devin was the name from pretty early on. We were interested, obviously, we were working on coding agents from the beginning, and my co-founders are Steven and Walden, for example, and we had this idea. All right, let's get started, and let's try to kind of like expand the box as much as we can. So have everyone kind of think out of the box and do their own thing. And let's have everyone do their own thing first for a bit. And then we'll kind of like consolidate and take everything that we've learned. And so, Walden made a virtual, developer version of him, which was called Dev Walden. And then Steven made one of him, which was called Dev Steven. And, we had all these, and then we were kind of combining it all into one thing. And we're like, okay, it's Devin. And that was the thing. And so Devin was like, Devin stuck for us like quite early on, I would say. One thing which we did have a big decision on, though, actually, is what the image of Devin would be. And so, as folks know, there's the hexagons, and then people might have seen this more recently, but there's actually also an otter, like a little otter with a laptop in its lap. That is Devin as well. And we had this debate over what to go with and what not to go with and stuff. And it was it's been a while now, but somehow we still have both the hexagons and the otter.
You skipped over where the Devin is. Like, did you just have just?
Oh, so Devin is it's a dev, yeah. And so it's kind of like when we were consolidating all the names, it just kind of seemed clear then that this would be the universal dev that we all like to work with. Yeah,
incredible, Scott. This was so much fun. Oh my god, I learned a ton, which is always a really good sign. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you /Devin / anything else you want to point them to? And how can listeners be useful to you?
Awesome. Yeah, no, we're at app.devin.ai. And you can find us as well on Twitter or a lot of other social media. We'd obviously love to hear any feedback you have about the Devin product. Like there's so much to figure out. And I think like I said, I think we're all still like 20 steps away from really the future of software engineering. And so it really means a lot to hear what folks think about the product as they're trying it out. And so please let us know anytime if there's things that we can do to make it better.
Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Me too. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.